evening, everyone. Let's get started. Yes? So we got the finale of the book here, and I got some bad news. Library wasn't able to help me with the fourth animated book. Sucks to be me. So, animated. Did I say animated? I did say animated. I meant illustrated. So, when I went to see about getting the fourth book hardcover, they told me that they didn't have the book, and the hardcover was outside of their system. They'd have to order a large print paperback from the nearby town. The nearby town was almost within walking distance of where I stood, like maybe 5 miles. And I actually had to go there for some other business. So I went there. Rather than wait 2 days, I went there immediately. And sure enough, they had the book. And it was hardcover. So I will be able to start with the book tomorrow in hardcover. Sadly, there is no pictures for me to show you. It'll just be a narration, and I am sorry about that. But I do have the book, and I will be able to show it to you, or I will be able to read it for you. So, hello, Nathan. Hello, Manstead. Bala. Nathan, Manson, Bala. Yeah, that's it. That's all I see. So, when we last left off, Buckbeak was executed. Sucks to be Buckbeak. I like that hippogriff, but it also didn't really... It's like... The book makes you feel sad for him, but at the same time, it doesn't actually go into detail. Like, you only see him periodically through the book. It's not like it's Scabbers or someone who is, constant or repeatedly small little bits everywhere in all the books. You'll see Scabbers. So if it was Scabbers executed, for whatever reason you would execute a mouse, it would be a little bit more traumatizing, I guess. But this is an NPC. This is a hippogriff that we only just barely knew. We're more sorry for Hagrid, but we only just barely knew this hippogriff. So, Zero concurrent viewers. How is that a thing when I see a chat just appearing? Literally. Go figure. Anyways, let's begin, yes? We'll be going until we finish the book. We got about 75, maybe 79 pages left, yes? Yes, yes, yes. All right. Chapter 17. Cat, Rat, and Dog. Harry's mind had gone blank with shock. The three of them stood transfixed with horror under the invisibility cloak. The very last rays of the setting sun were casting a bloody light over the long shadowed grounds. Then, behind them, they heard a wild howling. Hagrid, Harry muttered. Without thinking about what he was doing, he made to turn back, but both Ron and Hermione seized his arms. We can't, said Ron, who was paper white. They'll be in worse trouble if they know we've been to see him. Hermione's breathing was shallow and uneven. How could they? She choked. How could they? Come on, said Ron, whose teeth seemed to be chattering. They set off back towards the castle, walking slowly to keep themselves hidden under the cloak. Light was fading fast now. By the time they reached open ground, darkness was settling like a spell around them. Scabbers, keep still, Ron hissed, clamping his hand over his chest. The rat was wriggling madly. Ron came to a sudden halt, trying to force Scabbers deeper into his pocket. What's the matter with you, you stupid rat? Stay still. Ouch! You bit me. Ron, be quiet, Harry whispered urgently. Fudge will be out here any minute. He won't stay. What? Scabbers was plainly terrified. He was writhing with all his might, trying to break free of Ron's grip. What's the matter with him? But Harry had just seen, slinking towards him, his body low to the ground, wide yellow eyes glinting eerily in the darkness. Crookshanks. Whether he could see them, or following the sound of Scabbers' squeaks, Harry couldn't tell. Crookshanks, Hermione moaned. No, go away, Crookshanks, go away. But the cat was getting nearer. Scabbers, no! Too late. The rat had slipped between Ron's clutching fingers, hit the ground, and scampered away. In one bound, Crookshanks sprang after him, and before Harry or Hermione could stop him, Ron had thrown the invisibility cloak off himself and pelted away into the darkness. Ron! Hermione moaned. She and Harry looked at each other, then followed at a sprint. It was impossible to run full out under the cloak. They pulled it off and streamed behind him like a banner as they hurtled after Ron. They could hear his feet thundering along ahead and his shouts at Crookshanks. Get away from him! Get away! Scabbers! Come here! There was a loud thud. Gotcha! Get off, you stinking cat! Harry and Hermione almost fell over Ron. They skidded to a stop right in front of him. He was sprawled on the ground, but Scabbers was back in his pocket. He had both hands held tight over the quivering lump. Ron, come on, back under the cloak, Hermione panted. Dumbledore, the minister, they'll be coming back out in a minute. But before they could cover themselves again, before they could even catch their breath, they heard the soft pounding of gigantic paws. Something was bounding towards them out of the dark, an enormous, pale-eyed, jet-black dog. Harry reached for his wand, but too late. The dog had made an enormous leap, and its front paws had hit him on the chest. He keeled over backwards in a whirl of hair. He felt its hot breath, saw inch-long teeth. But the force of its leap carried it too far. It rolled off him, dazed. Feeling as though his ribs were broken, Harry tried to stand up. He could hear it growling as it skidded around for a new attack. Ron was on his feet. As the dog sprang back towards them, he pushed Harry aside. The dog's jaws fastened instead around Ron's outstretched arm. Harry lunged at it and seized a handful of the brute's hair, but it was dragging Ron away as easily as if he were a rag doll. Then, out of nowhere, something hit Harry so hard across the face, he was knocked off his feet again. He heard Hermione shriek with pain and fall too. Harry groped for his wand, blinking blood out of his eyes. Lumos, he whispered. The wand light showed him the trunk of a thick tree. They had chased Scabbers into the shadow of the Whomping Willow, and its branches were creaking as though in a high wind, whipping backwards and forwards to stop them going nearer. And there, The base of the trunk was the dog, dragging Ron backwards into a large gap in the roots. Ron was fighting furiously, but his head and torso were slipping out of sight. "Ron!" Harry shouted, trying to follow. But a heavy branch whipped lethally through the air, and he was forced backwards again. All they could see now was one of Ron's legs, which he had hooked around a root in an effort to stop the dog pulling himself further underground. Then a horrible crack cut the air like a gunshot. Ron's leg had broken, and next second, his foot had vanished from sight. "Harry, we've got to go for help," Hermione cried. She was bleeding too. The willow had cut her across the shoulder. "No, that thing's big enough to eat him. We haven't got time. We're never going to get through without help." Another branch whipped down at them, twigs clenched like knuckles. "If that dog can get in, we can," Harry panted, darting here and there, trying to find a way through the vicious, swishing branches. But he couldn't get an inch nearer to the tree roots without being in range of the tree blows. "Oh, help! Help!" Hermione whispered frantically, dancing uncertainly on the spot. "Please." Crookshanks started forwards. He slithered between the battering branches like a snake and placed his front paws upon a knot on the trunk. Abruptly, as though the tree had been turned to marble, it stopped moving. Not a leaf twitched or shook. "Crookshanks!" Hermione whispered uncertainly. She now grasped Harry's arm painfully hard. "How did he know?" "He's friends with that dog," said Harry grimly. "I've seen them together. Come on, and keep your wand out." They covered the distance to the trunk in seconds, but before they reached the gap in the roots, Crookshanks had slid into it with a flick of his bottle brush tail. Harry went next. He crawled forwards, head first, and slid down an earthy slope to the bottom of a very low tunnel. Crookshanks was a little way along, his eyes flashing in the light from Harry's wand. Seconds later, Hermione slithered down beside him. "Where's Ron?" she whispered in a terrified voice. "This way," Harry said, setting off, bent backed after Crookshanks. "Where does this tunnel come out?" Hermione asked breathlessly from behind. "I don't know. It's marked on the Marauder's map, but Fred and George said no one's ever got into it. It goes off the edge of the map, but it looked like it ends up in Hogsmeade." They moved as fast as they could, bent almost double, ahead of them. Crookshanks' tail bobbed in and out of view. On and on went the passage. It felt at least as long as the one to Honeyduke's. All Harry could think of was Ron, and what the enormous dog might be doing to him. He was drawing breath in sharp, painful gasps, running at a crouch. And then the tunnel began to rise. Moments later, it twisted, and Crookshanks had gone. Instead, Harry could see a patch of dim light through a small opening. He and Hermione paused, gasping for breath, edging forwards. Both raised their wands to see what lay about beyond. It was a room, a very disordered, dusty room. Paper was peeling from the walls. There were stains all over the floor. Every piece of furniture was broken as though somebody had smashed it. The windows were all boarded up. Harry glanced at Hermione, who looked very frightened, but nodded. Harry pulled himself out of the hole, staring around. The room was deserted. but a door to their right stood open, leading to a shadowy hallway. Hermione suddenly grabbed Harry's arm again. Her wide eyes were traveling around the boarded windows. "Harry," she whispered, "I think we're in the Shrieking Shack." Harry looked around. His eyes fell on a wooden chair near them. Large chunks had been torn out of it. One of the legs had been ripped off entirely. "Ghosts didn't do that," he said slowly. At that moment, there was a creak overhead. Something had moved upstairs. Both of them looked up at the ceiling. Hermione's grip on Harry's arm was so tight he was losing feeling in his fingers. He raised his eyebrows at her. She nodded again and let go. Quietly as they could, they crept out into the hall and up the crumbling staircase. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, except the floor, where a wide, shiny stripe had been made by something being dragged upstairs. They had reached the dark landing. "Knox," they whispered together, and the lights on at the end of their wands went out. Only one door was open. As they crept towards it, they heard movement from behind it. A low moan, and then a deep, loud purring. They exchanged a last look, a last nod. Wand held tightly before him, Harry kicked the door wide open. On a magnificent four-poster bed with dusty hangings lay Crookshanks, purring loudly at the sight of them. On the floor beside him, clutching his leg, which stuck out at a strange angle, was Ron. Harry and Hermione dashed across him. "Ron, are you okay? Where's the dog?" "Not a dog," Ron moaned. His teeth were gritted with pain. "Harry, it's a trap." "What?" "He's the dog. He's an animagus." Ron was staring over Harry's shoulder. Harry wheeled around. The snap. The man in shadows closed the door behind them. A mass of filthy, matted hair hung to his elbows. If eyes hadn't been shining out of the deep, dark sockets, he might have been a corpse. The waxy skin was stretched so tightly over the bones of his face, it looked like a skull. His yellow teeth were bared in a grin. It was Sirius Black. "Expelliarmus!" he croaked, pointing Ron's wand at them. Harry's and Hermione's wands shot out of their hands high into the air, and Black caught them. Then he took a step closer. His eyes were fixed on Harry. "I thought you'd come and help your friend," he said hoarsely. His voice sounded as though he had long ago lost the habit of using it. "Your father would have done the same for me. Brave of you not to run for a teacher. I'm grateful. It will make everything much easier." The taunt about his father rang in Harry's ears as though Black had bellowed it. A boiling hate erupted from Harry's chest, leaving no place for fear. For the first time in his life, he wanted his wand back in his hand, not to defend himself, but to attack, to kill. Without knowing what he was doing, he started forwards, but there was a sudden movement on either side of him, and the two pairs of hands grabbed him and held him back. "No, Harry," Hermione gasped in a petrified whisper. Ron, however, spoke to Black. "If you want to kill Harry, you'll have to kill us too," he said fiercely, though the effort of standing up had drained him of still more color, and he swayed slightly as he spoke. Something flickered in Black's shadowed eyes. "Lie down," he said quietly to Ron. "You will damage that leg even more." "Did you hear me?" Ron said weakly, though he was clinging painfully to Harry to stay upright. "You have to kill all three of us." "There'll only be one murder here tonight," said Black. His grin widened. "Why's that?" Harry spat, trying to wrench himself free of Ron and Hermione. "Didn't care last time, did you? Didn't mind slaughtering all those muggles to get at Pettigrew? What's the matter? Gone soft in Azkaban?" "Harry," Hermione whimpered, "be quiet." "He killed my mom and dad," Harry roared. And with huge effort, he broke free of Hermione and Ron's restraint and lunged forwards. He had forgotten about magic. He had forgotten that he was short and skinny and 13, whereas Black was a tall, full-grown man. All Harry knew was that he wanted to hurt Black as badly as he could, and that he didn't care how much he got hurt in return. Perhaps it was the shock of Harry doing something so stupid, but Black didn't raise the wands in time. One of Harry's hands fastened over Black's wasted wrist, forcing the wand tips away. The knuckles of Harry's other hand collided with the side of Black's head as they fell backwards into the wall. Hermione was screaming. Ron was yelling. There was a blinding flash as the wands in Black's hand sent into the air a jet of sparks which missed Harry's face by inches. Harry felt the shrunken arm under his fingers twisting madly, but he clung on, his other hand punching every part of Black it could find. But Black's free hand had found Harry's throat. "No," he hissed. "I've waited too long." The fingers tightened. Harry choked, his glasses askew. Then he saw Hermione's foot swing out of nowhere. Black let go of Harry with a grunt of pain. Ron had thrown himself on Black's wand hand, and Harry heard a faint clatter. He fought free of the tangle of bodies and saw his own wand rolling across the floor. He threw himself towards it, but Crookshanks had joined the fray. Both sets of front claws had sunk themselves deep into Harry's arm. Harry threw him off, but Crookshanks now darted towards Harry's wand. "No, you don't!" roared Harry, and he aimed a kick at Crookshanks that made the cat leap aside, spitting. Harry snatched up his wand and turned. "Get out of the way!" he shouted at Ron and Hermione. They didn't need telling twice. Hermione, gasping for breath, her lip bleeding, scrambled aside, snatching up her and Ron's wand. Ron called to the four-poster and collapsed onto it, panting, his white face now tinged with green, both hands clutching his broken leg. Black was sprawled at the bottom of the wall. His thin chest rose and fell rapidly as he watched Harry walking slowly nearer, his wand pointing straight at Black's heart. "Going to kill me, Harry?" he whispered, still pointing at Black's chest. Looking down at him, a livid bruise was rising around Black's left eye, and his nose was bleeding. "You killed my parents," said Harry, his voice shaking slightly, but his wand hand was quite steady. Black stared up at him out of those sunken eyes. "I don't deny it," he said very quietly. "But if you knew the whole story—" "The whole story?" Harry repeated, a furious pounding in his ears. "You sold them to Voldemort. That's all I need to know." "Got to listen to me," Black said, and there was a note of urgency in his voice now. "You'll regret it if you don't. You don't understand. I understand a lot better than you think, said Harry, and his voice shook more than ever. You never heard her, did you? My mum, trying to stop Voldemort killing me, and you did that. You did it. Before either of them could say another word, something ginger streaked past Harry. Crookshanks leapt onto Black's chest and settled himself there, right over Black's heart. Black blinked and looked down at the cat. Get off, he murmured, trying to push Crookshanks off him. But Crookshanks sank his claws into Black's robes and wouldn't shift. He turned his ugly, squashed face to Harry and looked up at him with those great yellow eyes. To his right, Hermione gave a dry sob. Harry stared down at Black and Crookshanks, his grip tightening on his wand. So what if he had to kill the cat too? It was in league with Black. If it was prepared to die, trying to protect Black, that wasn't Harry's business. If Black wanted to save it, that only proved he cared more for Crookshanks than Harry's parents. Harry raised the wand. Now was the moment to do it. Now was the moment to avenge his mother and father. He was going to kill Black. He had to kill Black. This was his chance. The seconds lengthened. Still, Harry stood frozen there, wand poised, Black staring up at him, Crookshanks on his chest. Ron's ragged breathing came from the bed. Hermione was quite silent. And then came a new sound. Muffled footsteps were echoing up through the floor. Someone was moving downstairs. We're up here! Hermione screamed suddenly. We're up here! Sirius Black! Quick! Black made a startled movement that almost dislodged Crookshanks. Harry gripped his wand convulsively. Do it now, said a voice in his head. But the footsteps were thundering up the stairs, and Harry hadn't done it. The door of the room burst open in a shower of red sparks, and Harry wheeled around as Professor Lupin came hurtling into the room, his face bloodless, his wand raised and ready. His eyes flicked over Ron, lying on the floor, over Hermione, cowering next to the door, to Harry, standing there with his wand covering Black, and then to Black himself, crumpled and bleeding at Harry's feet. Expelliarmus! Lupin shouted. Harry's wand flew once more out of his hand, and so did the two Hermione was holding. Lupin caught them all deftly, then moved into the room staring at Black, who still had Crookshanks lying protectively over his chest. Harry stood there, feeling suddenly empty. He hadn't done it. His nerve had failed him. Black was going to be handed back to the Dementors. Then Lupin spoke, in an odd voice, a voice that shook with some suppressed emotion. Where is he, Sirius? Harry looked quickly at Lupin. He didn't understand what Lupin meant. Who was Lupin talking about? He turned to look at Black again. Black's face was quite expressionless. For a few seconds, he didn't move at all. Then very slowly, he raised his empty hand and pointed straight at Ron. Mystified, Harry glanced around at Ron, who looked bewildered. But then, Lupin muttered, staring at Black so intently it seemed he was trying to read his mind. Why hasn't he shown himself before now? Unless... Lupin's eyes suddenly widened, as though he were seeing something beyond Black, something none of the rest could see. Unless he was the one, unless you switched without telling me? Very slowly, his sunken gaze never leaving Lupin's face, Black nodded. Professor Lupin, Harry interrupted loudly. What's going? But he never finished the question, because what he saw made his voice die in his throat. Lupin was lowering his wand. Next moment, he had walked to Black's side, seized his hand, pulled him to his feet so that Crookshanks fell to the floor, and embraced Black like a brother. Harry felt as though the bottom had dropped out of his stomach. I don't believe it, Hermione screamed. Lupin let go of Black and turned to her. She had raised herself to the floor and was pointing at Lupin, wild-eyed. You, Hermione, you and him. Hermione, calm down. I didn't tell anyone, Hermione shrieked. I've been covering up for you. Hermione, listen to me, please, Lupin shouted. I can explain. Harry could feel himself shaking. Not with fear, but with a fresh wave of fury. I trusted you, he shouted at Lupin, his voice wavering out of control. And all the time, you've been his friend. You're wrong, said Lupin. I haven't been Sirius's friend for 12 years, but I am now. Let me explain. No, Hermione screamed. Harry, don't trust him. He's been helping Black get into the castle. He wants you dead too. He's a werewolf. There was a ringing silence. Everybody's eyes were now on Lupin, who looked remarkably calm, though rather pale. Not at all up to your usual standard, Not at all up to your usual standard, Hermione. Only 1 out of 3, I'm afraid. I have not been helping Sirius get into the castle, and I certainly don't want Harry dead. An odd shiver passed over his face. But I won't deny that I am a werewolf. Ron made a valiant effort to get up again, but fell back with a whimper of pain. Lupin made towards him, looking concerned, but Ron gasped, Get away from me, werewolf! Lupin stopped dead. Then, with an obvious effort, he turned to Hermione and said, How long have you known? Ages, Hermione whispered. Since I did Professor Snape's essay. He'll be delighted, said Lupin coolly. He said that essay hoping someone would realize what my symptoms meant. Did you check the lunar chart and realize that I was always ill at the full moon? Or did you realize that the boggart changed into the moon when it saw me? Both, Hermione said quietly. Lupin forced a laugh. You're the cleverest witch of your age I've ever met, Hermione. I'm not, Hermione whispered. If I'd been a bit clever, I'd have told everyone what you are. But they already know, said Lupin. At least the staff do. Dumbledore hired you when he knew you were a werewolf? Ron gasped. Is he mad? Some of the staff thought so, said Lupin. He had to work very hard to convince certain teachers that I'm trustworthy. And he was wrong, Harry yelled. You've been helping him all the time. He was pointing at Black, who had crossed the four-poster bed and sunk onto it, his face hidden in one shaking hand. Crookshanks leapt up beside him and stepped onto his lap, purring. Ron edged away from both of them, dragging his leg. I have not been helping Sirius, said Lupin. If you give me a chance, I'll explain. Look. He separated Harry, Ron, and Hermione's wands and threw them each back to its owner. Harry caught his, stunned. There, said Lupin, sticking out his own wand back into his belt. You're armed. We're not. Now will you listen? Harry didn't know what to think. Was it a trick? If you hadn't been helping him, he said, with a furious glance at Black, how did you know he was here? The map, said Lupin. The Marauder's map. I was in my office examining it. How do you know how to work it? Harry said suspiciously. Of course I know how to work it, said Lupin, waving his hand impatiently. I helped write it. I'm Mooney. That was my friend's nickname for me at school. You wrote? The important thing is, I was watching it carefully this evening because I had an idea that you, Ron, and Hermione might try to sneak out of the castle to visit Hagrid before his hippogriff was executed. And I was right, wasn't I? He had started to pace up and down, looking at them. Little patches of dust rose at his feet. You might have been wearing your father's old cloak here. How do you know about the cloak? The number of times I saw James disappearing under it, said Lupin, waving an impatient hand again. The point is, even if you were wearing an invisibility cloak, you still show up on the Marauder's map. I watched you cross the grounds and enter Hagrid's hut. 20 minutes later, you left Hagrid and set off towards the castle. But you were now accompanied by somebody else. What? No, we weren't, said Harry. I couldn't believe my eyes, said Lupin, still pacing and ignoring Harry's interruption. I thought the map must be malfunctioning. How could he be with you? No one was with us. And then I saw another dot, moving fast towards you, labeled Sirius Black. I saw him collide with you. I watched as he pulled two of you into the Whomping Willow. One of us. No, Ron. Two of you. He had stopped his pacing, his eyes moving over to Ron. Do you think I could have a look at that rat? He said evenly. What? What's Scabbers got to do with it? Everything, said Lupin. Could I see him, please? Ron hesitated, then put a hand inside his robes. Scabbers emerged, thrashing desperately. Ron had to seize his long, bald tail to stop him escaping. Crookshanks stood up on Black's lap and made a soft hissing noise. Lupin moved closer to Ron. He seemed to be holding his breath as he gazed intently at Scabbers. What? Ron said again, holding Scabbers close to him and looking scared. What's my rat got to do with anything? That's not a rat, croaked Sirius Black suddenly. What do you mean? Of course he's a rat. No, he's not, said Lupin quietly. He's a wizard. An animagus, said Black, by the name of Peter Pettigrew. And that ends chapter 17. Hello, Manstan. Welcome back. That is a picture of a picture. I kinda wish I had known about it. Oh well. Here's the cover. Boarded up window at the Shrieking Shack. The bushy tail of Crookshanks, stretching from the bottom, just flicking up there, all fuzzy and full fur. And then there's this beauty. That's the stuff of horrors. Yeah. I saw something like that just kind of staring at me, I would be, I'd be, kind of scared. Not gonna lie, gonna be kind of scared about that one. And that's all of the pictures of chapter 17. Hey, Snugs. Thank you. No worries about not staying. Thank you for stopping by, regardless, and leaving a like. I appreciate that. Excuse me. Alright. Next page. Next chapter. But I hope you are doing. I was about to say well, but everyone says well. I hope you're doing better. Better? That implies that you were bad. Let's start over again. Hi, I'm Lightgazer. You must be Snugs. I've heard a lot about you. Alright, let's begin chapter 18, yes? Chapter 18. Mooney, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs. It took a few seconds for the absurdity of this statement to sink in. Then Ron voiced what Harry was thinking. You're both mental. Ridiculous, said Hermione faintly. Peter Pettigrew's dead, said Harry. He killed him 12 years ago. He pointed at Black, whose face twitched convulsively. I meant to, he growled, his yellow teeth bared. Literal Peter got the better of me. Not this time, though. And Crookshanks was thrown to the floor as Black lunged at Scabbers. Ron yelled with pain as Black's weight fell onto his broken leg. Sirius, no! Lupin yelled, launching himself forward, dragging back away from Ron. Wait, you can't do it just like that. They need to understand. We've got to explain. Can explain afterwards, snarled Black, trying to throw Lupin off, one hand still clawing the other air as it tried to reach Scabbers, who was squealing like a piglet, scratching Ron's face and neck as he tried to escape. They've got a right to know everything, Lupin panted, still trying to restrain Black. Ron's kept him as a pet. There are parts of it even I don't understand. And Harry, you owe Harry the truth, Sirius. Black stopped struggling, though his hollowed eyes were still fixed on Scabbers, who clamped tightly under Ron's bitten, scratched, and bleeding hands. All right, then, Black said, without taking his eyes off the rat. Tell them whatever you like. But make it quick, Remus. I want to commit the murder I was imprisoned for. You're nutters, both of you, said Ron shakily, looking round at Harry and Hermione for sport. I've had enough of this. I'm off. He tried to heave himself up on his good leg, but Lupin raised his wand again, pointing at Scabbers. You're going to hear me out, Ron, he said quietly. Just keep tight hold on Peter while you listen. He's not Peter. He's Scabbers, Ron yelled, trying to force the rat back into his front pocket. But Scabbers was fighting too hard. Ron swayed and overbalanced. Harry caught him and pushed him back down into the bed. Then, ignoring Black, Harry turned to Lupin. There are witnesses who saw Pettigrew die, he said. All street full of them. They didn't see what they thought they saw, said Black savagely, still watching Scabbers struggling in Ron's hand. Everyone thought Sirius killed Peter, said Lupin, nodding. I believed it myself, until I saw the map tonight. Because the Marauder's map never lies. Peter's alive, Ron. Ron's holding him, Harry. Harry looked down at Ron, and as their eyes met, they agreed, silently. Black and Lupin were out of their minds. Their story made no sense whatsoever. How could Scatters be Peter Pettigrew? Azkaban must have unhinged Black after all. But why was Lupin playing along with him? Then Hermione spoke in a trembling, would-be calm sort of voice, as though trying to will Professor Lupin to talk sensibly. But, Professor Lupin, Scabbers can't be Pettigrew. It just can't be true. You know it can't. Why can't it be true? Lupin said calmly, as though they were in class, and Hermione had simply spotted a problem in an experiment. With Grindylows. Because people would know if Peter Pettigrew had been an animagus. We did Animagus in class with Professor McGonagall, and I looked them up when I did my homework. The Ministry keeps tabs on witches and wizards who can become animals. There's a register showing what animal they become, and their markings and things. I went and looked Professor McGonagall up on the register, and there have only been 7 animagi this century, and Pettigrew's name wasn't on the list. Harry barely had time to marvel inwardly at the effort Hermione put into her homework when Lupin started to laugh. Right again, Hermione. But the Ministry never knew that there used to be 3 unregistered animagi running around Hogwarts. If you're gonna tell them the story, get a move on, Remus, snarled Black, who was still watching Scabbers' every desperate move. I've waited 12 years. I'm not gonna wait much longer. All right, but you'll need to help me, Sirius. I only know how it began. Lupin broke off. There had been a loud creak behind him. The bedroom door had opened of its own accord. All 5 of them stared at it. Then Lupin strode towards it and looked out into the landing. No one there. This place is haunted, said Ron. It's not, said Lupin, still looking at the door in a puzzled way. The Shrieking Shack was never haunted. The screams and howls the villagers used to hear were made by me. He paused, his graying hair out of his eyes, thought for a moment, then said, That's where all of this starts, with my becoming a werewolf. None of this could have happened if I hadn't been bitten, and if I hadn't been so foolhardily. He looked sober and tired. Ron started to interrupt, but Hermione said, Shh. She was watching Lupin very intently. I was a very small boy when I received the bite. My parents tried everything. But in those days, there was no cure. The potion that Professor Snape has been making for me is a very recent discovery. It makes me safe, you see. As long as I take it in the week preceding the full moon, I keep my mind when I transform. I'm able to curl up in my office, a harmless wolf, and wait for the moon to wane again. Before the wolfsbane potion was discovered, however, I became a fully fledged monster once a month. It seemed impossible that I would be able to come to Hogwarts. Other parents weren't likely to want their children exposed to me. But then Dumbledore became headmaster, and he was sympathetic. He said that, as long as we took certain precautions, there was no reason I shouldn't come to school. Lupin sighed and looked directly at Harry. I told you, months ago, that the Whomping Willow was planted the year I came to Hogwarts. Truth is that it was planted because I had come to Hogwarts. This house, Lupin looked miserably around the room, the tunnel that leads to it, they were built for my use. Once a month, I was smuggled out of the castle into this place to transform. The tree was placed at the tunnel mouth to stop anyone coming across me while I was dangerous. Harry couldn't see where this story was going, but he was listening raptly all the same. The only sound apart from Lupin's voice was Scabbers' frightened squeaking. My transformations in those days were terrible. It is very painful to turn into a werewolf. I was separated from humans to bite, so I bit and scratched myself instead. The villagers heard the noise and the screaming and thought there were particularly violent spirits. Dumbledore even encouraged the rumor. Even now, when the house has been silent for years, the villagers don't dare approach it. But apart from my transformations, I was happier than I had ever been in my life. For the first time ever, I had friends. 3 great friends. Sirius Black, Peter Pettigrew, and of course, your father, Harry, James Potter. Now, my 3 friends could hardly fail to notice that I disappeared once a month. I made up all sorts of stories. I told them my mother was ill, and that I had to go home to see her. I was terrified they would desert me the moment they found out what I was. But of course, they, like you, Hermione, worked out the truth. And they didn't desert me at all. Instead, they did something for me that would make my transformations not only bearable, but the best times of my life. They became animagi. My dad, too? Said Harry, astounded. Yes, indeed. It took them the best part of 3 weeks to work out how to do it. Your father and Sirius here were the cleverest students in the school. And lucky they were, because the animagus transformation can go horribly wrong. One reason the Ministry keeps a close watch on those attempting to do it. Peter needed all the help he could get from James and Sirius. Finally, in our 5th year, they managed it. They could each turn into a different animal at will. But how did that help you? Said Hermione, sounding puzzled. They couldn't keep me company as humans, so they kept me company as animals, said Lupin. A werewolf is only a danger to people. They sneaked out of the castle every month under James's invisibility cloak. They transformed. Peter, as the smallest, could slip beneath the willow's attacking branches and touch the knot that freezes it. They would then slip down the tunnel and join me. Under their influence, I became less dangerous. My body was still full of fish, but my mind seemed to become less so while I was with them. Hurry up, Remus, snarled Black, who was still watching Scabbers with a horrible sort of hunger in his face. I'm getting there, Sirius, I'm getting there. Well, highly exciting possibilities were open to us now that we could all transform. Soon we were leaving the Shrieking Shack and roaming the school grounds and the village by night. Sirius and James transformed into such large animals, they were able to keep a werewolf in check. I doubt whether any Hogwarts student ever found out more about Hogwarts grounds and Hogsmeade than we did. And that's how we came to write the Marauder's map and sign it with our nicknames. Sirius is Padfoot, Peter is Wormtail, and James was Prongs. What sort of animal? Harry began, but Hermione cried across him. That's still really dangerous, running around in the dark with a werewolf. What if you'd given the others a slip and bitten somebody? A thought that still haunts me, said Lupin, and there were near misses, many of them. We laughed about them afterwards. We were young, thoughtless, carried away with our own cleverness. I sometimes felt guilty about betraying Dumbledore's trust, of course. He had admitted me to Hogwarts when no other headmaster would have done so. And he had no idea I was breaking the rules he had set down for my own and others' safety. He never knew I had led 3 fellow students into becoming animagi illegally. But I always managed to forget my guilty feelings every time we sat down to plan out our next month's adventure. And I haven't changed. Lupin's face had hardened, and there was self-disgust in his voice. All this year, I had been battling with myself, wondering whether I should tell Dumbledore that Sirius was an animagus. But I didn't do it. Why? Because I was too cowardly. It would have meant admitting that I'd betrayed his trust while at school, admitting that I'd led others along with me. And Dumbledore's trust meant everything to me. He let me into Hogwarts as a boy, and he gave me a job, when I should have been shunned all my adult life, unable to find paid work because of what I am. And so I convinced myself that Sirius was getting into the school using dark arts he learned from Voldemort, that being an animagus had nothing to do with it. So, in a way, Snape's been right about me all along. Snape, said Black harshly, taking his eyes off Scabbers for the first time in minutes and looking up at Lupin. What's Snape got to do with it? He's here, Sirius, said Lupin heavily. He's teaching here as well. He looked up Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Professor Snape was at school with us. He fought very hard against my appointment to the Defense Against the Dark Arts job. He has been telling Dumbledore all year that I am not to be trusted. He has his reasons, you see. Sirius here played a trick on him, which nearly killed him. A trick which involved me. Black made a derisive noise. Served him right, he sneered, sneaking around, trying to find out what we were up to, hoping we could get us expelled. Severus was very interested in where I went every month, Lupin told Harry, Ron, and Hermione. We were in the same year, you know, and we didn't like each other very much. He especially disliked James. Jealous, I think, of James' talent on the Quidditch pitch. Anyway, Snape had seen me crossing grounds with Madame Pomfrey one evening, and she led me towards the Whomping Willow to transform. Sirius thought it would be amusing to tell Snape all he had to do was prod the knot on the tree trunk with a long stick, and he'd be able to get in after me. Well, of course, Snape tried it. If he'd got as far as this house, he would have met a fully grown werewolf. But your father, who'd heard what Sirius had done, went after Snape, pulled him back, at great risk to his life. Snape glimpsed me, though, at the end of the tunnel. It was forbidden to tell anybody by Dumbledore, but from that time on, he knew what I was. So that's why Snape doesn't like you. Because he thought you were in on the joke? That's right, sneered a cold voice from the wall behind him. Severus Snape was pulling off the invisibility cloak, his wand pointing directly at Lupin. That ends Chapter 18. I almost don't want to stop, honestly. I almost didn't stop. Oh, wow. All right, picture time, yes. Oh, I'm already past this. That was a very, very short chapter. Okay. You want to know how short? There's the cover. with the Whomping Willow. And there's Scabbers. There's that page. And the next page. That was it. The shortest chapter we have come across thus far. Sheesh. Well, let's continue, yes? Oh, there's something on this page. What is that? I don't know what that is. Looks like a tear. Oh, it is a tear, but it's on the other side. Oh, no. That sucked. Chapter 19. The Servant of Lord Voldemort. Hermione screamed. Black leapt to his feet. Harry jumped as though he received a huge electric shock. I found this at the base of the Whomping Willow, said Snape, throwing the cloak aside, careful to keep his wand pointing directly at Lupin's chest. Very useful, Potter. I thank you. Snape was slightly breathless, but his face was full of suppressed triumph. You're wondering, perhaps, how I knew you were here? He said, his eyes glittering. I've just been to your office, Lupin. You forgot to take your potion tonight, so I took a goblet full along, and very lucky I did. Lucky for me, I mean. Lying on your desk was a certain map. One glance at it told me all I needed to know. I saw you running along this passageway and out of sight. Severus, Lupin began. Snape overrode him. I've told Headmaster again and again that you've been helping your old friend Black into the castle, Lupin. And here's the proof. Not even I dreamed that you would have the nerve to use this old place as your hideout. Severus, you're making a mistake, said Lupin urgently. You haven't heard everything. I can explain. Sirius is not here to kill Harry. 2 more for Azkaban tonight, said Snape, his eyes now gleaming fanatically. I shall be interested to see how Dumbledore takes this. He was quite convinced you were harmless. You know, Lupin, a tame werewolf. You fool, said Lupin softly. Is a schoolboy grudge worth putting an innocent man inside Azkaban? Bang! Thin, snake-like cords burst from the end of Snape's wand and twisted around Lupin's mouth, wrists, and ankles. He overbalanced and fell to the floor, unable to move. With a roar of rage, Black started towards Snape, but Snape pointed his wand straight between Black's eyes. Give me a reason, he whispered. Give me a reason to do it, and I swear I will. Black stopped dead. It would have been impossible to say which face showed more hatred. Harry stood there, paralyzed, not knowing what to do or who to believe. He glanced around at Ron and Hermione. Ron looked just as confused as he did, still fighting to keep hold of the struggling Scabbers. Hermione, however, took an uncertain step towards Snape and said, in a very breathless voice, Professor Snape, it wouldn't hurt to hear what they have to say, would it? Miss Granger, you're already facing suspension from this school, Snape spat. You, Potter, and Weasley are out of bounds, in the company of a convicted murderer and a werewolf. For once in your life, hold your tongue. But if If there was a mistake, keep quiet, you stupid girl, Snape shouted, looking suddenly quite deranged. Don't talk about what you don't understand. A few sparks shot out of the end of his wand, which was still pointing at Black's face. Hermione fell silent. Vengeance is very sweet, Snape breathed at Black. How I hoped I would be the one to catch you. The joke's on you again, Severus, snarled Black. As long as this boy brings his rat up to the castle. He jerked his head at Ron. I'll come quietly. Up to the castle? said Snape sulkily. I don't think we have to go that far. All I have to do is call out to the Dementors once we get out of the willow. They'll be very pleased to see you, Black. Pleased enough to give you a little kiss, I dare say. What little color there was in Black's face left it. You've got to hear me out, he croaked. The rat. Look at the rat. But there was a mad glinting in Snape's eyes that Harry had never seen. He seemed beyond reason. Come on, all of you, he said. He clicked his fingers, and the ends of the cords that bound Lupin flew to his hands. I'll drag the werewolf. Perhaps the Dementors will have a kiss for him, too. Before he knew what he was doing, Harry had crossed the room in 3 strides and blocked the door. Get out of the way, Potter. You're in enough trouble already. If I hadn't been here to save your skin. Professor Lupin could have killed me about 100 times this year, Harry said. I've been alone with him loads of time, having defense lessons against the Dementors. If he was helping Black, why didn't he just finish me off then? Don't ask me how to fathom the way a werewolf's mind works, hissed Snape. Get out of the way, Potter. You're pathetic, Harry yelled. Just because they made a fool out of you at school, you won't even listen. Silence. I will not be spoken to like that, Snape shrieked, looking madder than ever. Like father, like son, Potter. I have just saved your neck. You should be thanking me on bended knee. You would have been well served if he'd killed you. You'd have died like your father, too arrogant to believe you might be mistaken in Black. Now, get out of the way, or I'll make you. Get out of the way, Potter! Harry made up his mind in a split second. Before Snape could even take one step towards him, he raised his wand. Expelliarmus! He yelled. Except that he wasn't the only voice that shouted. There was a blast that made the door rattle on its hinges. Snape was lifted off his feet and slammed into the wall, then slid down on the floor, a trickle of blood oozing from under his hair. He had been knocked out. Harry looked around. Both Ron and Hermione had tried to disarm Snape at exactly the same moment. Snape's wand soared in a high arc and landed on the bed next to Crookshanks. Shouldn't have done that, said Black, looking at Harry. You should have left him to me. Harry avoided black eyes. He wasn't sure, even now, that he'd done the right thing. We attacked a teacher. Hermione whimpered, staring at the lifeless Snape with frightened eyes. Oh, we're going to be in so much trouble. Lupin was struggling against his bonds. Black bent down quickly and untied him. Lupin straightened up, rubbing his arms where the ropes had cut into them. Thank you, Harry. He said. I'm still not saying I believe you, Harry retorted. Then it's time we offered you some proof, said Black. You, boy. Give me Peter now. Ron clutched Scabbers closer to his chest. Come off it, he said weakly. Are you trying to say you broke out of Azkaban just to get your hands on Scabbers? I mean... He looked up at Harry and Hermione for sport. Okay, say Pettigrew could turn into a rat. There are millions of rats. How is he supposed to know which one he's after he was locked up in Azkaban? You know, Sirius. That's a fair question, said Lupin, turning to Black and frowning. How did you find out where he was? Black put up one of his claw-like hands inside his robe and took out a crumpled piece of paper, which he smoothed flat and held out to show the others. It was the photograph of Ron and his family that appeared in the Daily Prophet the previous summer, and there, on Ron's shoulders, was Scabbers. How did you get this? Lupin asked Black, thunderstruck. Fudge, said Black. When he came to inspect Azkaban last year, he gave me this paper, and there was Peter, on the front page, on this boy's shoulder. I knew him at once. How many times have I seen him transform? And the caption said how the boy would be going back to Hogwarts, to where Harry was. My God, said Lupin, softly, staring from Scabbers to the picture in the paper and back again. His front paw. What about it? Said Ron defiantly. He's got a toe missing. Of course, Lupin breathed. So simple, so brilliant. He cut it off himself? Just before he transformed, said Black. When I courted him, he yelled for the whole street to hear that I'd betrayed Lily and James. Then before I could curse him, he blew apart the street with his wand behind his back, killed everyone within 20 feet of himself, and sped down the sewers with the other rats. Didn't you ever hear, Ron? The biggest bit of Peter they found was his finger. Look, Scabbers had a fight with another rat or something. He's been in my family for ages, right? 12 years, in fact, said Lupin. Didn't you ever wonder why he was living so long? We've been taking good care of him, said Ron. Not looking too good at the moment, though, is he? Said Lupin. I guess he's been losing weight ever since he heard Sirius was on the loose again. He's been scared of that mad cat, said Ron, nodding towards Crookshanks, still purring on the bed. But that wasn't right, Harry thought suddenly. Scabbers has been looking ill before he met Crookshanks. Ever since Ron's return from Egypt. Ever since the time when Black escaped. Black, the cat, isn't mad, said Black hoarsely. He reached out a bony hand and stroked Crookshanks' fluffy head. He's the most intelligent of his kind I've ever met. You recognized Peter for what he was straight away. And when he met me, he knew I was no dog. It was a while before he trusted me. Finally, I managed to communicate to him what I was after, and he's been helping me. What do you mean? Breathed Hermione. He tried to bring Peter to me, but couldn't, so he stole the passwords in Gryffindor Tower from me, and as I understood it, he took them from a boy's bedside table. Harry's brain seemed to be sagging under the weight of what he was hearing. It was absurd, and yet... But Peter got wind of what was going on and ran for it. This cat, Crookshanks, did you call him, told me Peter had left blood on the sheets. I suppose he bit himself well. Faking his own death had worked once. These words jolted Harry to his senses. And why did he fake his death? He said furiously. Because he knew you were about to kill him like you killed my parents. No, said Lupin. Harry, and now you've come to finish him off. Yes, I have, said Black with an evil look at Scabbers. I should have let Snape take you, Harry shouted. Harry, said Lupin hurriedly, don't you see? All this time we've thought Sirius betrayed your parents. and Peter tracked him down. But it was the other way around, don't you see? Peter betrayed your mother and father. Sirius tracked Peter down. That's not true, Harry yelled. He was their secret keeper. He said so before you turned up. He said he killed them. He was pointing at Black, who shook his head slowly. His sunken eyes were suddenly overbright. Harry, I as good as killed them, he croaked. I persuaded Lily and James to change to Peter at the last moment. Persuaded them to use him as secret keeper instead of me. I'm to blame. I know it. The night they died, I had arranged to check on Peter to make sure he was still safe. But when I arrived at his hiding place, he'd gone. Yet there was no sign of a struggle. It didn't feel right. I was scared. I set out for your parents' house straight away. When I saw their house destroyed and their bodies, I realized what Peter must have done. What I'd done. His voice broke. He turned away. Enough of this, said Lupin. There was a steely note in his voice Harry had never heard before. There's one certain way to prove what really happened. Ron, give me that rat. What are you going to do with him if I give him to you? Ron asked Lupin tensely. Force him to show himself. If he really is a rat, it won't hurt him. Ron hesitated, then at last held out Scabbers, and Lupin took him. Scabbers began to squeak without stopping, twisting and turning, his tiny black eyes bulging in his head. Ready, Sirius? Black had already retrieved Snape's wand from the bed. He approached Lupin and the struggling rat, and his wet eyes suddenly seemed to be burning in his face. Together? He said quietly. I think so, said Lupin, holding Scabbers tightly in one hand and his wand in the other. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. A flash of blue-white erupted from both wands. For a moment, Scabbers was frozen in midair. His small black form twisted madly. Ron yelled. The rat fell and hit the floor. There was another blinding flash of light, and then it was like watching a speeded-up film of a growing tree. A head was shooting upwards from the ground. Limbs were sprouting. Next moment, a man was standing where Scabbers had been, cringing and wringing his hands. Crookshanks was spitting and snarling at the bed, the hair on his back standing up. He was a very short man, hardly taller than Harry or Hermione. His thin, colorless hair was unkempt, and there was a large bald patch on top. He had the shrunken appearance of a plump man who had lost a lot of weight in a short time. His skin looked grubby, almost like Scabbers' fur, and something of the rat lingered around his pointed nose, his very small, watery eyes. He looked around at them all, his breathing fast and shallow. Harry saw his eyes dart to the door and back again. Well, hello, Peter, said Lupin pleasantly, as the rats frequently erupted into old-school friends around him. Long time no see. Serious Remus. Even Pettigrew's voice was squeaky. Again, his eyes darted towards the door. My friends. My old friends. Black's wand arm rose, but Lupin seized him around the wrist, gave him a warning look, and turned around to Pettigrew, his voice light and casual. We've been having a little chat, Peter, about what happened the night Lily and James died. You might have missed the finer points while you were squeaking around down there on the bed. Remus, gasped Pettigrew. and Harry could see beads of sweat breaking out over his pasty face. You don't believe him, do you? He tried to kill me, Remus. So we've heard, said Lupin, more coldly. I'd like to clear up one or two little matters with you, Peter, if you'd be so... He's come to try to kill me again. Pettigrew shrieked suddenly, pointing at Black, and Harry saw that he had used his middle finger because his index was missing. He killed Lily and James, and now he's going to kill me too. You've got to help me, Remus. Black's face looked more skull-like than ever as he stared at Pettigrew with his fathomless eyes. No one's going to try to kill you until we've sorted out a few things, said Lupin. Sorted things out? Squealed Pettigrew, looking wildly about him once more, eyes taking in the boarded windows and, again, the only door. I knew he'd come after me. I knew he'd be back for me. I've been waiting for this for 12 years. You knew Sirius was going to break out of Azkaban? Said Lupin, his brow furrowed, when nobody had ever done it before. He's got dark powers the rest of us can only dream of, Pettigrew shouted shrilly. How else did he get out of there? I suppose he who must not be named taught him a few tricks. Black started to laugh, a horrible, mirthless laugh that filled the whole room. Voldemort, teach me tricks, he said. Pettigrew flinched as though Black had brandished a whip at him. What? Scared to hear your old master's name, said Black. I don't blame you, Peter. His Lawns aren't very happy with you, are they? Don't know what you mean, Sirius, muttered Pettigrew, his breathing faster than ever. His whole face was shining with sweat now. You haven't been hiding from me for 12 years, said Black. You've been hiding from Voldemort's old supporters. I heard things in Azkaban, Peter. They all think you're dead. Or you'd have to answer to them. I've heard them screaming all sorts of things in their sleep. Sounds like they think the double-crosser double-crossed them. Voldemort went to Potter's on your information, and Voldemort met his downfall there. Not all of Voldemort's supporters ended up in Azkaban, did they? There's still plenty out there, biding their time, pretending they've seen the error of their ways. If they ever got wind that you were still alive, Peter... Don't know what you're talking about, said Pettigrew again, more shrilly than ever. He wiped his face on his sleeve and looked at Lupin. You don't believe this. This is madness, Remus. I must admit, Peter, I have difficulty in understanding why an innocent man would want to spend 12 years as a rat, said Lupin evenly. Innocent, but scared, squealed Pettigrew. If Voldemort's supporters were after me, it was because I put one of their best men in Azkaban, a spy, Sirius Black. Black's face contorted. How dare you, he growled, sounding suddenly like the bear-sized dog he had been. I spy for Voldemort. When did I ever sneak around people who were stronger and more powerful than myself? But you, Peter, I'll never understand why I didn't see you from the spy from the start. You always liked big friends who look after you, didn't you? Used to be us. Me and Remus. And James. Pettigrew wiped his face again. He was almost panting for breath. Me, a spy? Must be out of your mind. Never. Don't know how you could say such a... Lily and James only made you secret keeper because I suggested it, Black hissed, so venomously that Pettigrew took a step backwards. I thought it was the perfect plan. A bluff. Voldemort would be sure to come after me. Would never dream they'd use a weak, talentless thing like you. It must have been the finest moment of your miserable life, telling Voldemort you could hand him the Potters. Pettigrew was muttering distractedly. Harry caught words like far-fetched and lunacy, but he couldn't help paying more attention to the ashen color of Pettigrew's face and the way his eyes continued to dart around towards the windows and door. "Professor Lupin," said Hermione timidly, can I ask you something?" "Certainly, Hermione," said Lupin courteously. "Well, Scabbers, I mean, this man, he's been sleeping in Harry's dormitory for 3 years. If he's working for you-know-who, how come he's never tried to hurt Harry before now?" "There!" said Pettigrew shrilly, pointing at Hermione with his maimed hand. "Thank you! You see, Remus, I never hurt a hair on Harry's head. Why would I?" "I'll tell you why," said Black. "Because you never did anything for anyone unless you could see what was in it for you. Voldemort's been in hiding for 12 years. They say he's half dead. You weren't about to commit murder right under Albus Dumbledore's nose for a wreck of a wizard who lost all his power, were you? You'd want to be quite sure he was the biggest bully in the playground before you went back to him, wouldn't you? Why else did you find a wizard family to take you in? Keeping an ear out for news, weren't you, Peter? Just in case your old protector regained strength and it was safe to rejoin him." Pettigrew opened his mouth and closed it several times. He seemed to have lost the ability to talk. Mr. Black? Serious?" said Hermione timidly. Black jumped at being addressed like this and stared at Hermione as though being spoken to politely was something he'd long forgotten. "If you don't mind me asking, how did you get out of Azkaban if you didn't use dark magic?" "Thank you," said Pettigrew, nodding frantically. "Exactly, precisely what I—" But Lupin silenced him with a look. Black was frowning slightly at Hermione, but not as though he was annoyed with her. He seemed to be pondering his answer. "I don't know how he did it," he said slowly. "I think the only reason I never lost my mind is that I knew I was innocent. There wasn't a happy thought, so that wasn't a happy thought. So the Dementors couldn't suck it out of me, but it kept me sane, and knowing who I am helped me keep my powers, so when it all became too much, I could transform into myself, become a dog. Dementors can't see, you know." He swallowed. "They feel their way towards people by sensing their emotions. They could tell that my feelings were less human, less complex when I was a dog. But they thought, of course, that I was losing my mind like everyone else in there. So it didn't trouble them. But I was weak, very weak, and I had no hope of driving them away from me without a wand. But then I saw Peter in that picture. I realized he was at Hogwarts with Harry, perfectly positioned to act if one hint reached his ears that the dark side was gathering strength again." Peter was shaking his head, mouthing noiselessly, but staring all the while at Black as though hypnotized, ready to strike the moment he could be sure of allies, to deliver the last Potter to them. If he gave them Harry, who dares say he betrayed Lord Voldemort, he'd be welcomed back with honors. So you see, I had to do something. I was the only one who knew Peter was still alive. Harry remembered what Mr. Weasley had told Mrs. Weasley. The guards say he's been talking in his sleep. Always the same thing. He's at Hogwarts. It was as if someone had lit a fire in my head, and the Dementors couldn't destroy it. It wasn't a happy feeling. It was an obsession. But it gave me strength. It cleared my mind. So one night when they opened my door to bring food, I slipped past them as a dog. It's so much harder for them to sense animal emotions that they were confused. I was thin, very thin, thin enough to slip through the bars. I swam as a dog, back to the mainland. I journeyed north and slipped into Hogwarts grounds as a dog. I've been living in the forest ever since, except when I came to watch the Quidditch, of course. You fly as well as your father did, Harry. He looked at Harry, who did not look away. Believe me, croaked Black. Believe me, I never betrayed James and Lily. I would have died before I betrayed them. And at long last, Harry believed him. Throat too tight to speak, he nodded. No! Pettigrew had fallen to his knees as though Harry's nod had been his own death sentence. He shuffled forward on his knees, groveling. His hands clasped in front of him, as though praying. Sirius, it's me. It's Peter, your friend. You wouldn't. Black kicked out, and Pettigrew recoiled. There's enough filth on my robes without you touching them, said Black. Remus, Pettigrew squeaked, turning to Lupin instead, writhing imploringly in front of him. You don't believe this? Wouldn't Sirius have told you they changed the plan? Not if he thought I was the spy, Peter, said Lupin. I assume that's why you didn't tell me, Sirius? He said casually over Pettigrew's head. Forgive me, Remus, said Black. Not at all, Padfoot, old friend, said Lupin, who was now rolling up his sleeves. And will you, in turn, forgive me for believing you were the spy? Of course, said Black, and the ghost of a grin flitted across his gaunt face. He, too, began rolling up his sleeve. Shall we kill him together? Yes, I think so, said Lupin grimly. You wouldn't. You won't, gasped Pettigrew. He scrambled around to Ron. Ron, haven't I been a good friend? A good pet? You won't let them kill me, Ron, will you? You're on my side, aren't you? But Ron was staring at Pettigrew with the utmost revulsion. I let you sleep in my bed, he said. Kind boy. Kind master. Pettigrew crawled towards Ron. You won't let them do it. I was your rat. I was a good pet. If you made a better rat than human, it's not much to boast about, Peter, said Black harshly. Ron, going still paler with pain, wrenched his broken leg out of Pettigrew's reach. Pettigrew turned on his knees, staggered, and seized the hem of Hermione's robe. Sweet girl, clever girl, you won't let them help me. Hermione pulled her robes out of Pettigrew's clutching hands and backed away against the wall, looking horrified. Pettigrew knelt, trembling uncontrollably, and turned his head towards Harry. Harry, you look just like your father. Just like him. How dare you speak to Harry? roared Black. How dare you face him? How dare you talk about James in front of him? Harry, whispered Pettigrew, shuffling towards him, hands outstretched. Harry, James wouldn't have wanted me killed. James would have understood, Harry. He would have shown me mercy. Both Lupin and Black strode forwards, seized Pettigrew's shoulders, and threw him backwards onto the floor. He sat there, twitching with terror, staring up at them. You sold Lily and James to Voldemort, said Black, who was shaking too. Do you deny it? Pettigrew burst into tears. It was horrible to watch. He looked like an oversized, balding baby, cowering on the floor. Sirius, what could I have done? The Dark Lord, you have no idea. He has weapons you can't imagine. I was scared, Sirius. I was never brave like you and Remus and James. I never meant it to happen. He who must not be named forced me. Don't lie, bellowed Black. You'd been passing information to him for a year before Lily and James died. You were his spy. He was taking over everywhere, gasped Pettigrew. What was there to be gained by refusing him? What was there to be gained by fighting the most evil wizard who'd ever existed? Said Black with terrible fury in his face. Only innocent lives, Peter. You don't understand, whined Pettigrew. He would have killed me, Sirius. Then you should have died, roared Black. Died rather than betray your friends, as we would have done for you. Black and Lupin stood shoulder to shoulder, wands raised. You should have realized, said Lupin quietly. If Voldemort didn't kill you, we would have. Goodbye, Peter. Hermione covered her face with her hands and turned to the wall. No! Harry yelled. He ran forward, placing himself in front of Pettigrew, facing the wands. You can't kill him, he said breathlessly. You can't. Black and Lupin both looked staggered. Harry, this piece of vermin is the reason why you have no parents. This, Black snarled, this cringing bit of filth would have seen you die too, without turning a hair. You heard him. His own stinking skin meant more to him than your whole family. I know, Harry panted. We'll take him up to the castle. We'll hand him over to the Dementors. He can go to Azkaban. Just don't kill him. Harry, gasped Pettigrew, and he flung his arms around Harry's knees. Thank you. It's more than I deserve. Thank you. Get off me, Harry spat, throwing Pettigrew's hands off him in disgust. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because I don't reckon my dad would have wanted his best friends to become killers. Just for you. No one moved or made a sound except Pettigrew, whose breath was coming in wheezes as he clutched his chest. Black and Lupin were looking at each other. Then, with one movement, they lowered their wands. You're the only person who has the right to decide, Harry, said Black. But think what he did. He can go to Azkaban, Harry repeated. If anyone deserves that place, he does. Pettigrew was still wheezing behind him. Very well, said Lupin. Stand aside, Harry. Harry hesitated. I'm going to tie him up, said Lupin. That's all, I swear. Harry stepped out of the way. Thin cord shot from Lupin's wand this time, and next moment, Pettigrew was wriggling on the floor, bound and gagged. But if you transform Peter, growled Black, his own wand pointing at Pettigrew, we will kill you. You agree, Harry? Harry looked down at the pitiful figure on the floor and nodded so that Pettigrew could see him. Right, said Lupin, suddenly businesslike. Ron, I can't mend bones nearly as well as Madame Pomfrey, so I think it's best if we just strap your leg up until we can get you to the hospital wing. He hurried over to Ron, bent down, tapped Ron's leg with his wand and muttered, Ferula. Bandages spun up Ron's leg, strapping it tightly to a splint. Lupin helped him to his feet. Ron put his weight gingerly on the leg and didn't wince. That's better, he said. Thanks. What about Professor Snape? Said Hermione in a small voice, looking down at Snape's prone figure. There's nothing seriously wrong with him, said Lupin, bending over Snape and checking his pulse. You were just a little, over-enthusiastic. Still out cold, Perhaps it will be best if we don't revive him until we're safely back in the castle. We could take him like this, he muttered. Mobili corpus. As though invisible strings were tied to Snape's wrists, neck, and knees, he was pulled into a standing position, head still lolling unpleasantly like a grotesque puppet. He hung a few inches above the ground, his limp feet dangling. Lupin picked up the invisibility cloak and tucked it safely into his pocket. And two of us should be chained to this, said Black, nudging Pettigrew with his toe, just to make sure. I'll do it, said Lupin. And me, said Ron, savagely, limping forward. Black conjured heavy manacles from thin air. Soon, Pettigrew was upright again, left arm chained to Lupin's right arm chained to Ron's left. Ron's face was set. He seemed to have taken Scabbers' true identity as a personal insult. Crookshanks slept lightly off the bed and led the way out of the room, his bottle-brush tail held jauntily high. And that ends Chapter 19. Welcome, Raiders. Dev, how was your stream? Oh, wow. Welcome, Raiders. So I got a raid from Die. Thank you. Welcome, Shosh and Senna. Welcome, Kinley, King Caney, and Dev in the lurking shadows. Welcome to you. Oh dear. So I saw Dev was streaming, but I can't quite remember. I need to look at my alerts. Visage. Didn't he stream that before? How did it go? Did you all have fun? More importantly, would you all like to see the pictures? There's a really nasty looking one in here. We are currently almost at the end of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. And why did I remove the bookmark? That's the previous... no, that's 2 chapters ago. I keep forgetting this one chapter is so crushingly short. So this is the beginning of chapter 19. The servant of Lord Voldemort. There's Professor Snape. Oops. I keep forgetting that the image is reversed. There's Professor Snape with his wand and black little tendrils. This is a very expensive book. I checked it out from the library. It costs $40, and unfortunately I'm unable to get the fourth one. I have the fifth one, and a fourth one in hardcover, but it's not illustrated, sadly. Look, even the background is all colored, but what is it? What is this background? It looks like either the floor or the wall of the Shrieking Shack, honestly. Same thing. And here is the horrible picture of poor little Peter Pettigrew. Aww, I almost feel sorry for him. He looks so scared. To be perfectly honest, I prefer no. 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 I preferred it when he looked like that. That is as horrible as having a little rat is. That rat is better than that. Way better. There. Like, you see? Although, in all honesty, that's the same pose. Hunched backed, head tilted forward and tilted to the side, hands clutching each other. It's the same photo. And yet, the rat looks cuter than Pettigrew ever did. That's for sure. Nothing on this page. Nothing on this page. And that's it. We don't got terribly too much more to go. We got... How many chapters are left? One, two, three. And this one isn't a long chapter either. Shall we begin the next chapter? Yes? Thank you for the 12 likes, everyone. Let's start the next chapter, yes? Alright. Chapter 20. The Dementor's Kiss. Harry had never been part of a stranger group. Crookshanks led the way down the stairs. Lupin, Pettigrew, and Ron went next, looking like contestants in a six-legged race. Next came Professor Snape, drifting creepily along, his toes hitting each stair as they descended, held up by his own wand, which was being pointed at him by Sirius. Harry and Hermione brought up the rear. Getting back into the tunnel was difficult. Lupin, Pettigrew, and Ron had to turn sideways to manage it. Lupin still had Pettigrew covered with his wand. Harry could see them edging awkwardly along the tunnel in single file. Crookshanks was still in the lead. Harry went right after Sirius, who was still making Snape drift along ahead of them. He kept bumping his lolling head on the low ceiling. Harry had the impression Sirius was making no effort to prevent this. "You know what this means," Sirius said abruptly to Harry as they made their slow progress along the tunnel. Turning Pettigrew in. "You're free," said Harry. "Yes," said Sirius, "but I'm also, if I don't know if anyone has ever told you, I'm your godfather." "Yeah, I knew that," said Harry. "Well, your parents appointed me your guardian," said Sirius stiffly. "If anything happened to them—" Harry waited. Did Sirius mean what he thought he meant? "I'll understand, of course, if you want to stay with your aunt and uncle," said Sirius. "But, well, think about it. Once my name's cleared, if you wanted a different home—" Some sort of explosion took place in the pit of Harry's stomach. "What? Live with you?" he said accidentally, cracking his head on a bit of rock protruding from the ceiling. "Leave the Dursleys?" Of course. I thought you wouldn't want to," said Sirius quickly. "I understand. I just thought I'd—" "Are you mad?" said Harry, his voice easily as croaky as Sirius's. "Of course I want to leave the Dursleys. Have you got a house? When can I move in?" Sirius turned right around to look at him. Snape's head was scraping the ceiling, but Sirius didn't seem to care. "You want to?" he said. "You mean it?" "Yeah, I mean it," said Harry. Sirius's gaunt face broke into the first true smile Harry had seen upon it. The difference it made was startling, as though a person 10 years younger was shining through the starved mask. For a moment, he was unrecognizable as the man who had laughed at Harry's parents' wedding. They did not speak again until they had reached the end of the tunnel. Crookshanks started up first. He had evidently pressed his paw to the knot of the trunk, because Lupin, Pettigrew, and Ron clambered upwards without any sound of savaging branches. Sirius saw Snape up through the hole, then stood back for Harry and Hermione to pass. At last, all of them were out. The grounds were very dark now. The only light came from distant windows of the castle. Without a word, they set off. Pettigrew was still wheezing on and occasionally whimpering. Harry's mind was buzzing. He was going to leave the Dursleys. He was going to live with Sirius Black, his parents' best friend. He felt dazed. What would happen when he told the Dursleys he was going to live with the convict they'd seen on television? "One wrong move, Peter," said Lupin threateningly ahead. His wand still pointed sideways at Pettigrew's chest. Silently, they tramped through the grounds. Their castle lights growing slowly larger. Snape was still drifting weirdly ahead of Sirius, his chin bumping on his chest. And then a cloud shifted. There were suddenly dim shadows on the ground. Their party was bathed in moonlight. Snape collided with Lupin, Pettigrew, and Ron, who had stopped abruptly. Sirius froze. He flung out an arm to make Harry and Hermione stop. Harry could see Lupin's silhouette. He had gone rigid. Then his limbs began to shake. "Oh my," Hermione gasped. "He didn't take his potion tonight. He's not safe." "Run," Sirius whispered. "Run, now!" But Hermione couldn't run. Or Harry couldn't run. Ron was chained to Pettigrew and Lupin. He leapt forward, but Sirius caught him around the chest and threw him back. "Leave it to me. Run!" There was a terrible snarling noise. Lupin's head was lengthening. So was his body. His shoulders were hunching. Hair was sprouting visibly on his face and hands, which were curling into clawed paws. Crookshank's fur was on end again. He was backing away. As the werewolf reared, snapping its long jaws, Sirius disappeared from Harry's side. He had transformed. The enormous bear-like dog bounded forward. As the werewolf wrenched itself free of the manacle binding it, the dog seized it about the neck and pulled it backwards, away from Ron and Pettigrew. They were locked, jaw to jaw, claws ripping at each other. Harry stood, transfixed by the sight, too intent on the battle to notice anyone else. It was Hermione's scream that alerted him. Pettigrew had died for Lupin's dropped wand. Ron, unsteady on his bandaged leg, fell. There was a bang. There was a bang, a burst of light, and Ron lay motionless on the ground. Another bang. Crookshanks flew into the air and back to the earth in a heap. "Expelliarmus!" Harry yelled, pointing his own wand at Pettigrew. Lupin's wand flew high into the air and out of sight. "Stay where you are!" Harry shouted, running forwards. Too late. Pettigrew had transformed. Harry saw his bald tail whip through the manacle on Ron's outstretched arm and heard a scurrying through the grass. There was a howl and a rumbling growl. Harry turned to see the werewolf taking flight. It was galloping into the forest. "Sirius! He's gone! Pettigrew transformed!" Harry yelled. Sirius was bleeding. There were gashes across his muzzle and back. But at Harry's words, he scrambled up again. In an instant, the sound of his paws was fading to silence as he pounded away across the grounds. Harry and Hermione dashed over to Ron. "What did he do to him?" Hermione whispered. Ron's eyes were only half closed. His mouth hung open. He was definitely alive. They could hear him breathing. But he didn't seem to recognize them. "I don't know." Harry looked desperately around. Black and Lupin both gone. They had no one but Snape for company, still hanging, unconscious in midair. "We better get them up to the castle and tell someone," said Harry, pushing his hair out of his eyes, trying to think straight. "Come." But then, out of the darkness, they heard a yelp, a whining, a dog in pain. "Sirius," Harry muttered, staring into the darkness. He had a moment's indecision, but there was nothing they could do for Ron at the moment, and by the sound of it, Black was in trouble. Harry set off at a run. Hermione was right behind him. The yelping seemed to be coming from near the lake. They pelted towards it, and Harry, running flat out, felt the cold without realizing what it must mean. The yelping stopped abruptly. As they reached the lake shore, they saw why. Sirius had turned back into a man. He was crouched on all fours, his hands over his head. "No," he moaned. "No, please." And then Harry saw them. Dementors, at least 100 of them, gliding in a black mass around the lake towards them. He spun around, the familiar icy cold penetrating his inside, fog starting to obscure his vision. More were appearing out of the darkness on every side. They were encircling them. "Hermione, think of something happy," Harry yelled, raising his wand, blinking furiously to try to clear his vision, shaking his head to rid it of the faint screaming that had started inside of it. I'm going to live with my godfather. I'm leaving the Dursleys. He forced himself to think of Sirius, and only Sirius, and began the chant. Expecto Patronum! Expecto Patronum! Black gave a shudder, rolled away, and lay motionless on the ground, pale as death. He'll be all right. I'm going to live with him. Expecto Patronum! Hermione, help me. Expecto Patronum! Expecto! Hermione whispered, Expecto, expecto, but she couldn't do it. The Dementors were closing in, barely 10 feet from them. They formed a solid wall around Harry and Hermione, and were getting closer. Expecto Patronum! Harry yelled, trying to blot out the screaming from his ears. Expecto Patronum! A thin wisp of silver escaped his wand and hovered like mist before him. At the same moment, Harry felt Hermione collapse next to him. He was alone. Completely alone. Expecto Patronum. Harry felt his knees hit the cold grass. Fog was clouding his eyes. With a huge effort, he fought to remember. Sirius was innocent. Innocent. We'll be okay. I'm going to live with him. Expecto Patronum, he gasped. By the feeble light of his formless patroness, he saw a Dementor halt, very close to him. It couldn't walk through the cloud of silver mist Harry had conjured. A dead, slimy hand slid out from under the cloak. It made a gesture as though to sweep the patroness aside. No, Harry gasped. He's innocent. Expecto Patronum. He could feel them watching him, hear their rattling breath like an evil wind around him. The nearest Dementor seemed to be considering him. Then it raised both its rotting hands and lowered its hood. Where there should have been eyes, there was only thin, gray, scabbed skin stretched blankly over empty sockets. But there was a mouth, a gaping, shapeless hole, sucking the air with the sound of a death rattle. A paralyzing terror filled Harry so that he couldn't move or speak. His patroness flickered and died. White fog was blinding him. He had to fight. Expecto Patronum. He couldn't see. And in the distance, he heard the familiar screaming, Expecto Patronum. He groped in the mist for Sirius and found his arms. They weren't going to take him. But a pair of strong, clammy hands suddenly wrapped themselves around Harry's neck. They were forcing his face upwards. He could feel its breath. It was going to get rid of him first. He could feel its putrid breath. His mother was screaming in his ears. She was going to be the last thing he ever heard. And then, through the fog that was drowning him, he thought he saw a silvery light growing brighter and brighter. He felt himself fall forward on the grass. Face down, too weak to move, sick and shaking, Harry opened his eyes. The blinding light was illuminating the grass around him. The screaming had stopped. The cold was ebbing away. Something was driving the Dementors back. It was circling around him and Sirius and Hermione. The rattling, sucking sounds of the Dementors were fading. They were leaving. The air was warm again. With every ounce of strength he could muster, Harry raised his head a few inches and saw an animal amidst the light, galloping across the lake. Eyes blurred with sweat, Harry tried to make out what it was. It was bright as a unicorn. Fighting to stay conscious, Harry watched it canter to a halt and reach the opposite shore. For a moment, Harry saw, by its brightness, somebody welcoming it back. Raised his hand to pat it, someone who looked strangely familiar. But it couldn't be. Harry didn't understand. He couldn't think anymore. He felt the last of his strength leave him, and his head hit the ground as he fainted. That ends Chapter 20. Audio quality? There's a problem with my audio quality? I could position the mic a touch better. A smaller room, I'm not entirely certain I could do anything about. Like, my computer, I'd have to move my entire computer setup, which I've already done once and is an absolute pain just to do audio, or just to do a recording. I mean, I'd do it if it was an audiobook, but then again, I'd probably just use a better computer and switch the mic there and just record myself with Audacity. I might do that if I have to. But for a stream, I can't necessarily really do much. Like, the computer is very stationary. It's actually in another room. I might be able to turn down the gain so it's not, like, peaking. But even as I'm speaking, well, no, as I'm speaking now, I do see it peaking. I suppose I could turn it down a smidge. Filter, gain, it's at 5. What would happen if I were to change that to 2? Oh. No. You don't need it at 20. Yeah, how about 2.5? That should work. Yes. Thank you for letting me know. I'll see what I can do about adjusting the mic. But it's like, where do I move it? It's sitting right here off to the side. Moving it here gets in the way of the book. Like, it'd be sitting right here, and I'd have to constantly move around just to do any kind of reading. I could potentially have it here, and then have the book mounted up like this, although this is too heavy for my hand to do. And what's more is you can't even see me doing that. I'd have to move the camera. And that cord doesn't stretch nearly as far. I'm not entirely certain I can move my mic aside from flipping it upside down. I apologize for that. Anyways, this is the illustrated book. What was this chapter? The Servant? Yes? No, this was the Dementor's Kiss. This is a very short chapter, too. Okay. We'll see how short. Pictures. This is the second chapter that I've seen in the series that has these boxed paragraphs here. Nothing but the Black Forest here. More of that Black Forest. There's the cover shot. The Dementor, or multiple Dementors, reaching around Harry, grabbing his neck, Harry trying to use the patronize and failing so horribly. Wow, that Dementor looks so horrible. Not quite. I wouldn't want to run into it in a dark alley, that's for sure. And that's it. So how many pages was those? Dupe. Alright. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No. 6. Wow. 6 pages for this chapter. Sheesh. Well, that's... Okay, I stand corrected. That was the shortest chapter. 6 pages for a chapter? Are you serious? I forgot about that. That is a way to end a chapter, though. Okay. Next chapter. I think there are only 2 chapters left. So let's get going with this next one, yes? Thank you for the 12 likes, everyone. And thank you for being here. Chapter 21. Hermione's Secret. Shocking business. Shocking. Miracle none of them died. Never heard the like. By thunder. It was lucky you were there, Snape. Thank you, Minister. Order of Merlin, 2nd class, I'd say. 1st class if I could wangle it. Thank you very much indeed, Minister. Nasty cut you've got there. Black's work, I suppose? As a matter of fact, it was Potter, Weasley, and Granger, Minister. No! Black had bewitched them. I saw it immediately. A confundus charm, to judge by their behavior. They seemed to think that there was a possibility he was innocent. They weren't responsible for their actions. On the other hand, their interference might have permitted Black to escape. They obviously thought they were going to catch Black single-handedly. They've got away with a great deal before now. I'm afraid it's given them a rather high opinion of themselves. And of course, Potter has always been allowed an extraordinary amount of license by the headmaster. Well, Snape, Harry Potter, you know, you've all got a bit of a blind spot where he's concerned. And yet, is it good for him to be given so much special treatment? Personally, I try to treat him like any other student, and any other student would be suspended, at the very least, for leading his friends into such danger. Consider, Minister, against all school rules, after all the precautions put in place for his protection, out of bounds, at night, consorting with a werewolf and a murderer, and I have reason to believe he has been visiting Hogsmeade illegally too. Well, we shall see, Snape. We shall see. The boy has undoubtedly been foolish. Harry lay listening with his eyes tight shut. He felt very groggy. The words he was hearing seemed to be traveling very slowly from his ears to his brain, so that it was difficult to understand. His limbs felt like lead, his eyelids too heavy to lift. He wanted to lie here on the comfortable bed forever. What amazes me most is the behavior of the Dementors. You've really no idea what made them retreat, Snape? No, Minister. By the time I had come round, they were headed back to their positions at the entrances. Extraordinary. And yet, Black and Harry and the girl, all unconscious by the time I reached them. I bound and gagged Black naturally, conjured structures, and brought them all straight back to the castle. There was a pause. Harry's brain seemed to be moving a little faster, and as it did, a gnawing sensation grew in the pit of his stomach. He opened his eyes. Everything was slightly blurred. Somebody had removed his glasses. He was lying in the dark hospital wing. At the very end of the ward, he could make out Madame Pomfrey with the back of her hand, with her back to him, bending over a bed. Harry squinted. Ron's wet hair was visible beneath Madame Pomfrey's arm. Harry moved his head over on the pillow. In the bed to his right lay Hermione. Moonlight was falling across her bed. Her eyes were open too. She looked petrified. When she saw that Harry was awake, pressed a finger to her lips, then pointed to the hospital wing door. It was ajar, and the voices of Cornelius Fudge and Snape were coming through it from the corridor outside. Madame Pomfrey now came walking briskly up the dark ward to Harry's bed. He turned to look at her. She was carrying the largest block of chocolate he had ever seen in his life. It looked like a small boulder. "Ah, you're awake," she said briskly. She placed the chocolate on Harry's bedside table and began breaking it apart with a small hammer. "How's Ron?" said Harry and Hermione together. "He'll live," said Madame Pomfrey grimly. "As for you two, you'll be staying here until I'm satisfied you're... Potter, what do you think you're doing?" Harry's sitting up, putting his glasses back on and picking his wand. "I need to see the headmaster," he said. "Potter," said Madame Pomfrey soothingly. "It's all right. They've got Black. He's locked away upstairs. The Dementors will perform the kiss any moment now." "What?" Harry jumped out of bed. Hermione had done the same, but his shout had been heard in the corridor outside. Next second, Cornelius, Fudge, and Snape had entered the ward. Harry, what's this?" said Fudge, looking agitated. "You should be in bed. Has he had any chocolate?" he asked Madame Pomfrey anxiously. "Minister, listen," Harry said. "Sirius Black's innocent. Pettigrew faked his own death. We saw him tonight. You can't let the Dementors do that thing to Sirius. He's..." But Fudge was shaking his head with a small smile on his face. Harry, you're very confused. You've been through a dreadful ordeal. Lie back down now. We've got everything under control." "You haven't," Harry yelled. "You've got the wrong man." "Minister, listen, please," Hermione said. She had hurried to Harry's side and was gazing imploringly into Fudge's face. "I saw him too. It was Ron's rat. He's an animagus, Pettigrew, and..." "You see, Minister," said Snape, "confounded both of them. Black's done a very good job on them." "We're not confounded," Harry roared. "Minister, Professor," said Madame Pomfrey angrily, "I must insist that you leave. Potter is my patient and he should not be distressed." "I'm not distressed. I'm trying to tell them what happened," Harry said furiously. "If they just listen." But Madame Pomfrey suddenly stuffed a large chunk of chocolate into Harry's mouth. He choked, and she seized the opportunity to force him back onto the bed. "Now, please, Minister. These children need care. Please leave." The door opened again. It was Dumbledore. Harry swallowed his mouthful of chocolate with great difficulty and got back up again. "Professor Dumbledore, Sirius Black..." "For heaven's sake," said Madame Pomfrey hysterically. "Is this a hospital wing or not? Headmaster, I must insist." "My apologies, Poppy, but I need a word with Mr. Potter and Miss Granger," said Dumbledore calmly. "I've just been talking to Sirius Black." "I suppose he's told you the same fairy tale he's planted in Potter's mind. Something about a rat and Pettigrew being alive." That, indeed, is Black's story, said Dumbledore, surveying Snape closely through his half-moon spectacles. And does my evidence count for nothing? Snarled Snape. Peter Pettigrew was not in the Shrieking Shack. Nor did I see any sign of him in the grounds. That's because you were knocked out. That's because you were knocked out, Professor, said Hermione earnestly. You didn't arrive in time to hear... Miss Granger, hold your tongue. Now, Snape, said Fudge, startled. The young lady is disturbed in her mind, and we must make allowance. I would like to speak to Harry and Hermione alone, said Dumbledore abruptly. Cornelius, Severus, Poppy, please leave us. Headmaster, spluttered Madame Pomfrey. They need treatment. They need rest. This cannot wait, said Dumbledore. I must insist. Madame Pomfrey pursed her lips and strode away into her office at the end of the ward, slamming the door behind her. Fudge consulted the large gold pocket watch dangling from his waistcoat. The Dementors should have arrived by now, he said. I'll go and meet them. Dumbledore, I'll see you upstairs. He crossed the door and held it open for Snape. But Snape hadn't moved. You surely don't believe a word of Black's story, Snape whispered, his eyes fixed on Dumbledore's face. I wish to speak to Harry and Hermione alone, Dumbledore repeated. Snape took a step towards Dumbledore. Sirius Black showed he was capable of murder at the age of 16, he breathed. You haven't forgotten that. You haven't forgotten that, Headmaster. You haven't forgot that he once tried to kill me. My memory is as good as it ever was, Severus, said Dumbledore quietly. Snape turned on his heel and marched through the door Fudge was still holding. It closed behind them, and Dumbledore turned to Harry and Hermione. They both burst into speech at the same time. Professor, Black's been telling the truth. We saw Pettigrew. He escaped when Professor Lupin turned into a... He's a rat. Pettigrew's his finger. He cut it off. Pettigrew attacked wrong. It wasn't serious. But Dumbledore held up his hand to stem the flood of explanations. It is your turn to listen, and I beg you will not interrupt me, because there is very little time, he said quietly. There is not a shred of proof to support Black's story, except your word. And the word of 2 13-year-olds will not convince anybody. A street full of eyewitnesses swore they saw Sirius murder Pettigrew. I myself gave evidence to the ministry that Sirius had been the Potter's secret keeper. Professor Lupin can tell you, Harry said, unable to stop. Professor Lupin is currently deep in the forest, unable to tell anyone anything. By the time he is human again, it will be too late. Sirius will be worse than dead. I might add that werewolves are so mistrusted by our kind that his support will count for very little. And the fact that he and Sirius are old friends. But listen to me, Harry. It is too late. You understand me? You must see that Professor Snape's version of events is far more convincing than yours. He hates Sirius, Hermione said desperately, all because of some stupid trick Sirius played. Sirius has not acted like an innocent man. The attack on the fat lady, entering Gryffindor with a knife, without Pettigrew, alive or dead, we have no chance of overturning Sirius's sentence. But you believe us. Yes, I do, said Dumbledore quietly, but I have no power to make other men see the truth, or to overrule the Minister for Magic. Harry stared up into the grey face and felt as though the ground beneath him was falling sharply away. He had grown used to the idea that Dumbledore could solve anything. He had expected Dumbledore to pull some amazing solution out of the air. But no, their last hope was gone. What we need said Dumbledore slowly, and his light blue eyes moved from Harry to Hermione. Is more time. But, Hermione began, and their eyes became very round. Oh. Now, pay attention, said Dumbledore, speaking very low and very clearly. Sirius is locked in Professor Flitwick's office on the 7th floor, 13th window from the right of the West Tower. If all goes well, you will be able to save more than one innocent life tonight. But you must remember this. Both of you. You must not be seen. Miss Granger, you know the law. You know what is at stake. You must not be seen. Harry didn't have a clue what was going on. Dumbledore had turned on his heel and looked back as he reached the door. I'm going to lock you in. It is 5 minutes to midnight, Miss Granger. 3 turns should do it. Good luck. Good luck, Harry repeated as the door closed behind Dumbledore. 3 turns? What's he talking about? What are we supposed to do? But Hermione was fumbling with the neck of her robes, pulling from beneath them a very long, very fine gold chain. Harry, come here, she said urgently. Quick! Harry moved towards her, completely bewildered. She was holding the chain out. He saw a tiny, sparkling hourglass hanging from it. Here. She had thrown the chain around his neck, too. Ready? She said breathlessly. What are we doing? Harry said, completely lost. Hermione turned the hourglass over 3 times. The dark ward dissolved. Harry had the sensation he was flying very fast, backwards. A blur of colors and shapes rushed past him. His ears were pounding. He tried to yell, but he couldn't hear his own voice. And then he felt solid ground beneath his feet, and everything came into focus again. He was standing next to Hermione in the deserted entrance hall, and a stream of golden light was falling across the paved floor and from the open front doors. He looked wildly at Hermione, the chain of the hourglass cutting into his neck. Hermione, what? In here! Hermione seized Harry's arm and dragged him across the hall to the door of the broom cupboard. She opened it, pushed him inside amongst the buckets and mops, followed him in, then slammed the door behind them. What? How? Hermione, what happened? You've gone back in time, Hermione whispered, lifting the chain off Harry's neck. In the darkness, 3 hours back. Harry found his own leg and gave it a very hard pinch. It hurt a lot, which seemed to rule out the possibility that he was having a very bizarre dream. But, shh, listen. Someone's coming. I think it might be us. Hermione had her ear pressed against the cupboard door. Footsteps across the hall. Yes, I think it's going to be us going down to Hagrid's. Are you telling me, Harry whispered, that we're here in this cupboard and we're out there too? Yes, said Hermione, her ear still glued to the cupboard door. I'm sure it's us. It doesn't sound like more than 3 people, and we're walking slowly because we're under the invisibility cloak. She broke off, still listening intently. Gone down the front steps. Hermione sat down on an upturned bucket, looking desperately anxious. Harry wanted a few questions answered. Where did you get that hourglass thing? It's called a time turner, Hermione whispered, and I got it from Professor McGonagall on our first day back. I've been using it all year to get to all my lessons. Professor McGonagall made me swear I wouldn't tell anyone. She had to write all sorts of letters to the Ministry of Magic so I could have one. She had to tell them that I was a model student and that I'd never, ever use it for anything except my studies. I've been turning it back so I could do hours over again, and that's how I've been doing several lessons at once. See? But, Harry, I don't understand what Dumbledore wants us to do. Why did he tell us to go back 3 hours? How's that going to help Sirius? Harry stared at her shadowy face. There's got to be something that happened around now he wants us to change. He said slowly. What happened? We were walking down to Hagrid's 3 hours ago. This is 3 hours ago, and we are walking down to Hagrid's, said Hermione. We just overheard ourselves leaving. Harry frowned. He felt as though he was screwing up his whole brain in concentration. Dumbledore just said we could save more than one innocent life. Then it hit him. Hermione, we're going to save Buckbeak. But how will that help Sirius? Dumbledore said he just told us where the window is. The window of Flitwick's office, where they've got Sirius locked up. We've got to fly Buckbeak up to the window and rescue Sirius. Sirius can escape on Buckbeak. They can escape together. From what Harry could see of Hermione's face, she looked terrified. If we manage to do that without being seen, it'll be a miracle. Well, we've got to try, haven't we? Said Harry. He stood up and pressed his own ear against the door. Doesn't sound like anyone's there. Come on, let's go. Harry pushed the cupboard door open. The entrance hall was deserted. As quietly and quickly as they could, they darted out of the cupboard and down the stone steps. The shadows were already lengthening. The tops of the trees in the Forbidden Forest gilded once more with gold. If anyone's looking out the window, Hermione squeaked, looking up at the castle behind them. We'll run for it, said Harry determinedly. Straight into the forest, all right? We'll have to hide behind a tree or something and keep a lookout. Okay, but we'll go round by the greenhouses, said Hermione breathlessly. We need to keep out of sight of Hagrid's front door, or we'll see us. We must be nearly at Hagrid's by now. Still working out what she meant, Harry set off at a sprint, Hermione behind him. They tore across the vegetable gardens to the greenhouses, paused for a moment behind them, then set off again, fast as they could, skirting around the whomping willow, tearing towards the shelter of the forest, safe in the shadows of the trees. Harry turned around. Seconds later, Hermione arrived beside him, panting. Right, she gasped. We need to sneak over to Hagrid's. Keep out of sight, Harry. They made their way silently through the trees, keeping to the very edge of the forest. Then, as they glimpsed the front of Hagrid's house, they heard a knock upon his door. They moved quickly behind the wide oak trunk and peered out from the other side. Hagrid had appeared in his doorway, shaking and white, looking around to see who had knocked, and Harry heard his own voice. It's us. We're wearing an invisibility cloak. Let us in, and we can take it off. Shouldn't have come, Hagrid whispered. He stood back, then shut the door quickly. This is the weirdest thing we've ever done, said Harry fervently. Let's move along a bit, Harry whispered. We need to get nearer to Buckbeak. They crept through the trees until they saw the nervous hippogriff tethered to the fence around Hagrid's pumpkin patch. Now? Harry whispered. No! If we steal him now, those committee people will think Hagrid set him free. We've got to wait until they've seen he's tied outside. It's going to give us about 60 seconds, said Harry. This was starting to seem impossible. At that moment, there was a crash of breaking china from inside Hagrid's cabin. That's Hagrid breaking the milk jug, Hermione whispered. I'm going to find Scabbers in a moment. Sure enough, a few minutes later, they heard Hermione's shriek of surprise. "Hermione," said Harry suddenly, "what if we just run in there and grab Pettigrew?" "No," said Hermione in a terrified whisper. "Don't you understand? We're breaking one of the most important wizarding laws. Nobody's supposed to change time. Nobody. You heard Dumbledore. If we're seen, we'd only be seen by ourselves and Hagrid. Harry, what do you think you'd do if you saw yourself bursting into Hagrid's house?" said Hermione. I'd think I'd gone mad," said Harry. "Or I'd think there was dark magic going." "Exactly. You wouldn't understand. You might even attack yourself. Don't you see? Professor McGonagall told me what awful things have happened when wizards meddled with time. Loads of them ended up killing their past or future selves by mistake." "Okay," said Harry. "It was just an idea. I just thought..." But Hermione nudged him and pointed towards the castle. Harry moved his head a few inches to get a clear view of the distant front doors. Dumbledore, Fudge, and the old committee member, and McNair, the executioner, were coming down the steps. "We're about to come out," Hermione breathed. And sure enough, moments later, Hagrid's back door opened, and Harry saw himself, Ron, and Hermione walking out of it with Hagrid. It was, without a doubt, the strangest sensation of his life, standing behind the tree and watching himself in this pumpkin patch. "It's okay, Beaky. It's okay," Hagrid said to Buckbeak. Then he turned to Harry, Ron, and Hermione. "Go on, get going." "Hagrid, we can't. We'll tell them what really happened. They can't kill him." "Go. It's bad enough without you lot in trouble and all." Harry watched the Hermione in the pumpkin patch throw the invisibility cloak over himself and Ron. "Go quick. Don't listen." There was a knock on Hagrid's front door. The execution party arrived. Hagrid turned around and headed back into his cabin, leaving the back door ajar. Harry watched the grass flatten in patches all around the cabin, and he heard 3 pairs of feet retreating. He, Ron, and Hermione had gone, but the Harry and Hermione hidden in the trees could now hear what was happening inside the cabin through the back door. "Where's the beast?" came the cold voice of McNair. Outside," Hagrid croaked. Harry pulled his head out of sight as McNair's face appeared at Hagrid's window, staring out at Buckbeak. Then they heard Fudge. We have to read you the official notice of execution, Hagrid. I'll make it quick, and then you and McNair need to sign it. McNair, you're supposed to listen too. That's procedure." McNair's face vanished from the window. It was now or never. "Wait here," Harry whispered to Hermione. "I'll do it." As Fudge's voice started again, Harry darted out from behind his tree, vaulted the fence, into the pumpkin patch, and approached Buckbeak. "It is the decision of the Committee of the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures that the Hippogriff Buckbeak, hereafter called the Condemned, shall be executed on the 6th of June at sundown." Careful not to blink, Harry stared up into Buckbeak's fierce orange eye once more and bowed. Buckbeak sank to his scaly knees and then stood up again. Harry began to fumble with the rope tying Buckbeak to the fence. "Sentenced to execution by beheading, to be carried out by the committee's appointed executioner, Walden McNair." "Come on, Buckbeak," Harry muttered. "Come on, we're going to help you. Quietly. Quietly." "As witness below, Hagrid, you sign here." Harry threw all his weight onto the rope, but Buckbeak had dug in his front feet. "Well, let's get this over with," said the reedy voice of the committee member from inside Hagrid's cabin. "Hagrid, Perhaps it would be better if you stayed inside. Nah. I want to be with him. I don't want him to be alone. Footsteps echoed from within the cabin. Buckbeak, move! Harry hissed. Harry tugged harder on the rope around Buckbeak's neck. The hippogriff began to walk, rustling its wings irritably. They were still 10 feet away from the forest, in plain view of Hagrid's back door. "One moment, please, McNair," came Dumbledore's voice. "You need to sign too." The footsteps stopped. Harry heaved on the rope. Buckbeak snapped his beak and walked a little faster. Hermione's white face was sticking out from behind a tree. "Harry, hurry," she mouthed. Harry could still hear Dumbledore's voice talking from within the cabin. He gave the rope another wrench. Buckbeak broke into a grudging trot. They had reached the trees. "Quick, quick," Hermione moaned, darting out from behind her tree, seizing the rope too and adding her weight to make Buckbeak move faster. Harry looked over his shoulder. They were now blocked from sight. They couldn't see Hagrid's garden at all. "Stop," he whispered to Hermione. "They might hear us." Hagrid's back door had opened with a bang. Harry, Hermione, and Buckbeak stood quite still. Even the hippogriff seemed to be listening intently. Silence then. "Where is it?" said the reedy voice of the committee member. "Where is the beast?" "It was tied here," said the executioner furiously. "I saw it just here." "How extraordinary," said Dumbledore. There was a note of amusement in his voice. "Beaky," said Hagrid huskily. There was a swishing noise and the thud of an axe. The executioner seemed to have swung it on to the fence in anger. And then came the howling. And this time they could hear Hagrid's words through his sobs. "Gone! Gone! Bless his little beak! He's gone! Must have pulled himself free, Beaky, you clever boy!" Buckbeak started to strain against the rope, trying to get back to Hagrid. Harry and Hermione tightened their grip and dug their heels into the forest floor to stop him. "Someone untied him," the executioner was snarling. "We should search the grounds, the forest." "McNair, if Buckbeak has indeed been stolen, do you really think the thief would have led him away on foot?" said Dumbledore, still sounding amused. "Search the skies, if you will, Hagrid. I could do with a cup of tea, or a large brandy." Of course, Professor," said Hagrid, who sounded weak with happiness. Come in, come in." Harry and Hermione listened closely. They heard footsteps, the soft cursing of the executioner, snap of the door, and then silence once more. "Now what?" whispered Harry, looking around. "We'll have to hide in here," said Hermione, who looked very shaken. "We need to wait until they've gone back to the castle." "Then we have to wait until it's safe to fly Buckbeak up to Sirius's window. You won't be there for another couple hours. Oh, this is going to be difficult." She looked nervously over her shoulder into the depths of the forest. The sun was setting now. "We're going to have to move," said Harry, thinking hard. "We've got to be able to see the Whomping Willow, or we won't know what's going on." "Okay," said Hermione, getting a firmer grip on Buckbeak's rope. "But we've got to keep out of sight, Harry. Remember." They moved around the edge of the forest, darkness falling thickly around them until they were hidden behind a clump of trees, through which they could make out the willow. "There's Ron," said Harry suddenly. A dark figure was sprinting across the lawn, and its shout echoed through the still night air. "Get away from him! Get away from Scabbers! Come here!" And then they saw two more figures materialize out of nowhere. Harry watched himself and Hermione chasing after Ron. Then he saw Ron dive. Gotcha, gotcha. Get off, you stinking cat. They're serious, said Harry. The great shape of the dog had bounded out from the roots of the willow. They saw him bowl Harry over, then seize Ron. Looks even worse from here, doesn't it? Said Harry, watching the dog pulling Ron into the roots. Ouch. Look, I just got walloped by the tree. So did you. This is weird. The whomping willow was creaking and lashing out with its lower branches. They could see themselves darting here and there, trying to reach the trunk. And then the tree froze. That was Crookshanks pressing the knot, said Hermione. There we go, Harry muttered. We're in. The moment they disappeared, the tree began to move again. Seconds later, they heard footsteps quite close by. Dumbledore, McNair, Fudge, and the old committee member were making their way up to the castle. Right after we'd gone down into the passage, said Hermione. If only Dumbledore had come with us. McNair and Fudge would have come too, said Harry bitterly. I bet you anything Fudge would have told McNair to murder Sirius on the spot. They watched the four men climb the castle steps and disappear from view. For a few minutes, the scene was deserted. Then, here comes Lupin, said Harry, as they saw another figure sprinting down the stone steps and hurrying towards the willow. Harry looked up at the sky. Clouds were obscuring the moon completely. They watched Lupin seize a broken branch from the ground and prod the knot on the trunk. The tree stopped fighting, and Lupin, too, disappeared into the gap in its roots. If only he'd grabbed the cloak, said Harry. It's just lying there, returned Hermione. If I just dashed out now and grabbed it, Snape would never be able to get it, and Harry, we mustn't be seen. How can you stand this? He asked Hermione fiercely. Just standing here and watching it happen. I'm going to grab the cloak. Harry, no! Hermione seized the back of Harry's robes not a moment too soon. Just then, they heard a burst of song. It was Hagrid, making his way up to the castle, singing in the top of his voice and weaving slightly as he walked, large bottle of swinging from his hands. See what would have happened? We've got to keep out of sight. No, Buckbeak! The hippogriff was making frantic attempts to get to Hagrid again. Harry seized his rope too, straining to hold Buckbeak back. They watched Hagrid meander tipsily up the castle. He was gone. Buckbeak stopped fighting to get away. His head drooped sadly. Barely 2 minutes later, the castle doors flew open again, and Snape had come charging out of them, running towards the willow. Harry's fist clenched as they watched Snape skid to a halt next to the tree. Looking around, he grabbed the cloak and held it up. Get your filthy hands off of it, Harry snarled under his breath. Shh. Snape seized the branch Lupin had used to freeze the tree, prodded the knob, and vanished from view as he put on the cloak. So that's it, said Hermione quietly. We're all down there, and now we've just got to wait until we come back up again. She took the end of Buckbeak's rope and tied it securely around the nearest tree, then sat down on the dry ground, arms around her knees. Harry, there's something I don't understand. Why didn't the Dementors get Sirius? I remember them coming, and then I think I passed out. There were so many of them. Harry sat down too. He explained what he'd seen, how, as the nearest Dementor had lowered its mouth to Harry's, a large silver thing had come galloping across the lake and forced the Dementors to retreat. Harry's mouth slightly opened by the time, or Hermione's mouth was slightly open by the time Harry had finished. But what was it? There's only one thing that could have made Ben to make the Dementors go, said Harry. A real patroness. A powerful one. But who conjured it? Harry didn't say anything. He was thinking back to the person he'd seen on the other bank of the lake. He knew who he thought it had been, but how could it have been? Didn't you see what they looked like? Said Hermione eagerly. Was it one of the teachers? No, said Harry. He wasn't a teacher, but it must have been a really powerful wizard to drive all those Dementors away. If the patroness was shining so brightly, didn't it light him up? Couldn't you see? Yeah. I saw him, said Harry slowly, but maybe I imagined it. I wasn't thinking straight. I passed out right afterwards. Who do you think it was? I think, Harry swallowed, knowing how strange this was going to sound. I think it was my dad. Harry glanced up at Hermione and saw that her mouth was fully open now. She was gazing at him with a mixture of alarm and pity. Harry, your dad's, well, dead, she said quietly. I know that, said Harry quickly. You don't think you saw his ghost? I don't know. No. He looked solid, but then, maybe I was seeing things, said Harry. But from what I could see, it looked like him. I've got photos of him. Hermione was still looking at him as though worried about his sanity. I know it sounds mad, said Harry flatly. He turned to look at Buckbeak, who was digging his beak into the ground, apparently searching for worms. But he wasn't really watching Buckbeak. He was thinking about his father, and about how the three oldest friends, Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs, had all four of them been out on the grounds tonight. Wormtail had reappeared this evening when everyone thought he was dead. Was it so impossible his father had done the same? Had he been seeing things across the lake? The figure had been too far away to see distinctly, yet he had felt sure for a moment before he had lost consciousness. The leaves overhead rustled faintly in the breeze. The moon drifted in and out of sight behind the shifting clouds. Hermione sat with her face turned towards the willow, waiting. And then at last, after over an hour, "Here we come," Hermione whispered. She and Harry got to their feet. Buckbeak raised his head. They saw Lupin, Ron, and Pettigrew clambering awkwardly out of the hole in the roots, followed by the unconscious Snape, drifting weirdly upwards. Next came Harry, Hermione, and Black. They all began to walk towards the castle. Harry's heart was starting to beat very fast. He glanced up at the sky. Any moment now, that cloud was going to move aside and show the moon. Harry, Hermione muttered, as though she knew exactly what he was thinking. We've got to stay put. We mustn't be seen. There's nothing we can do. So we're just going to let Pettigrew escape all over again, said Harry quietly. How do you expect to fight a rat in the dark? There's nothing we can do. We came back to help Sirius. We're not supposed to be doing anything else. All right. The moon slid out from behind its cloud. They saw the tiny figures across the ground stop. Then they saw movement. There goes Lupin, Hermione whispered. He's transforming. Hermione, said Harry suddenly, we've got to move. We mustn't. I keep telling you not to interfere, but Lupin's going to run into the forest right at us. Hermione gasped. Quick, she moaned, dashing to untie Buckbeak. Quick, where are we going to go? Where are we going to hide? The Dementors will be coming at any moment. Back to Hagrid's, Harry said. It's empty now. Come on. They ran, fast as they could, Buckbeak cantering along behind them. They could hear the werewolf howling behind them. Cabin was in sight. Harry skidded to the door, wrenched it open, and Hermione and Buckbeak flashed past him. Harry threw himself in after them and bolted the door. Fang the boarhound barked loudly. "Shh! Fang, it's us!" said Hermione, hurrying over and scratching his ears to quiet him. "That was really close," she said to Harry. "Yeah." Harry was looking out of the window. It was much harder to see what was going on from here. Buckbeak seemed very happy to find himself back inside Hagrid's house. He lay down in front of the fire, folded his wings contentedly, and seemed ready for a good nap. "I think I'd better go outside again, said Harry slowly. "I can't see what's going on, and we won't know when it's time." Hermione looked up. Her expression was suspicious. "I'm not going to try and interfere," said Harry quickly. "But if we don't see what's going on, how are we going to know when it's time to rescue Sirius?" "Well, okay then. I'll wait here with Buckbeak, but Harry, be careful. There's a werewolf out there, and the Dementors." Harry stepped outside again and edged around the cabin. He could hear yelping in the distance. That meant the Dementors were closing in on Sirius. He and Hermione would be running into him at any moment. Harry stared out towards the lake, his heart doing a kind of drum roll in his chest. Whoever had sent that Patronus would be appearing at any moment. For a fraction of a second, he stood, irresolute, in front of Hagrid's door. "You must not be seen." But he didn't want to be seen. He wanted to be doing the seeing. He had to know. And there were the Dementors. They were emerging from the darkness from every direction, gliding around the edges of the lake. They were moving away from where Harry stood to the opposite bank. He wouldn't have to get near them. Harry began to run. He had no thought in his head except his father. If it was him, if it really was him, he had to know. He had to find out. The lake was coming nearer and nearer, but there was no sign of anybody. On the opposite bank, he could see tiny glimmers of silver, his own attempts at a Patronus. There was a bush at the very edge of the water. Harry threw himself behind it, peering desperately through the leaves. On the opposite bank, the glimmers of silver were suddenly extinguished. A terrified excitement shot through him. Any moment now. "Come on," he muttered, staring about. "Where are you? Dad, come on." But no one came. Harry raised his head to look at the circle of Dementors across the lake. One of them was lowering its hood. It was the time for the rescuer to appear, but no one was coming to help this time. And then it hit him. He understood. He hadn't seen his father. He had seen himself. Harry flung himself out from behind the bush and pulled out his wand. "Expecto Patronum!" he yelled, and out of the end of his wand burst, not a shapeless cloud of mist, but a blinding, dazzling silver animal. He screwed up his eyes, trying to see what it was. It looked like a horse. It was galloping silently away from him, across the black surface of the lake. He saw it lower its head and charge at the swarmy Dementors. Now it was galloping around and around the black shapes on the ground, and the Dementors were falling back, scattering, retreating into the darkness. They were gone. Patronus turned. It was cantering back towards Harry across the still surface of the water. It wasn't a horse. It wasn't a unicorn either. It was a stag. It was shining brightly as the moon above. It was coming back to him. stopped on the bank. Its hooves made no mark on the soft ground as it stared at Harry with its large silver eyes. Slowly, it bowed its antler's head, and Harry realized. Prongs, he whispered. But as his trembling fingertips stretched toward the creature, it vanished. Harry stood there, hands still outstretched. Then, with a great leap of his heart, he heard hooves behind him. He whirled around and saw Hermione dashing towards him, dragging Buckbeak behind her. "What did you do?" she said fiercely. "You said you were only going to keep a lookout." "I just saved our lives," said Harry. "Get behind here, behind this bush. I'll explain." Hermione listened to what had just happened with her mouth open yet again. "Did anyone see you?" "Yes. Haven't you been listening?" "I saw me. But I thought it was my dad." "It's okay." "Harry, I can't believe it. You conjured up a patronus that drove away. You conjured up a patronus that drove away all those Dementors. That's very, very advanced magic." "I knew I could do it this time," said Harry, "because I'd already done it. Does that make sense?" "I don't know, Harry." "Harry, look at Snape." Together they peered around the bush at the other bank. Snape had regained consciousness. He was conjuring stretchers and lifting the limp forms of Harry, Hermione, and Black onto them. A fourth stretcher, no doubt bearing Ron, was already floating at his side. Then, wand held out in front of him, he moved them away towards the castle. "Right, it's nearly time," said Hermione tensely, looking at her watch. "We've got about 45 minutes until Dumbledore locks the door to the hospital wing. We've got to rescue Sirius and get back into the ward before anybody realizes we're missing." They waited, watching the moving clouds reflecting in the lake, while the bush next to them whispered in the breeze. Buckbeak, bored, was ferreting for worms again. "Do you reckon he's up there yet?" said Harry, checking his watch. He looked at the castle and began counting the windows to the right of the west tower. "Look," Hermione whispered. "Who's that? Somebody's coming back out of the castle." Harry stared through the darkness. The man was hurrying across the grounds towards one of the entrances. Something shiny glinted in his belt. "McNair," said Harry. "The executioner. He's gone to get the Dementors. This is it, Hermione." Hermione put her hands on Buckbeak's back and Harry gave her a leg up. Then he placed his foot on one of the lower branches of the bush and climbed up in front of her. He pulled Buckbeak's rope back over his neck and tied it to the other side of his collar like reins. "Ready?" he whispered to Hermione. "You'd better hold on to me." He nudged Buckbeak's side with his heels. Buckbeak soared straight into the dark air. Harry gripped his flanks with his knees, feeling the great wings rising powerfully beneath them. Hermione was holding Harry very tightly around the waist. He could hear her muttering, "Oh no, I don't like this. I really don't like this." Harry urged Buckbeak forwards. They were gliding quietly towards the upper floors of the castle. Harry pulled hard on the left-hand side of the rope, and Buckbeak turned. Harry was trying to count the windows flashing past. "Whoa," he said, pulling backwards as hard as he could. Buckbeak slowed down, and they found themselves at a stop, unless you counted the fact that they kept rising up and down several feet as he bat his wings to remain airborne. "He's there," Harry said, spotting Sirius as they rose up beside the window. He reached out, and as Buckbeak's wings fell, was able to tap sharply on the glass. Black looked up. Harry saw his jaw drop. He leapt from his chair, hurried to the window, and tried to open it, but it was locked. "Stand back," Harry called to him, and she took out a wand, still gripping the back of Harry's robes with her left wand. "Aloha Mora!" And the window sprang open. How? How? Said Black weakly, staring at the hippogriff. "Get on. There's not much time," said Harry, gripping Buckbeak firmly on either side of his sleek neck to hold him steady. "You've got to get out of here. The Dementors are coming. McNair's not gone to get them." Black placed a hand on either side of the window frame and heaved his head and shoulders out of it. It was very lucky he was so thin. In seconds, he had managed to fling one leg over Buckbeak's back and pull himself onto the hippogriff behind Hermione. "Okay, Buckbeak, up," said Harry, shaking the rope. To the tower, come on." The hippogriff gave one sweep of its mighty wings, and they were soaring upwards again, high as the top of the West Tower. Buckbeak landed with a clatter on the battlements, and Harry and Hermione slid off him at once. "Sirius, you better go, quick. They'll reach Flitwick's office at any moment. They'll find out you're gone." Buckbeak pawed the ground, tossing his sharp head. "What happened to the other boy?" "What happened to the other boy? Ron," said Sirius urgently. "He's going to be okay. He's still out of it, but Madame Pomfrey says she'll be able to make him better. Quick, go!" Black was still staring down at Harry. "How can I ever think—" "Go!" Harry and Hermione shouted together. Black wheeled Buckbeak around, facing the open sky. "See each other again," he said. "You are truly your father's son, Harry." He squeezed Buckbeak's side with his heels. Harry and Hermione jumped back as the enormous wings rose once more. The hippogriff took off into the air. He and his rider became smaller and smaller as Harry gazed after them. Then a cloud drifted across the moon. They were gone. And that ends chapter 21. Only one chapter to go. You want to see pictures? There is one really, really good picture in here. It made the rest of the words really hard to read, too. There's the little dragon hourglass choker thing. I now know what that was. That's the time turner. Cover page for chapter 21. Literally nothing. Although, it should be noted that while there was nothing on the last page and this one, this page isn't white, it's beige. Whereas the rest of them are like this color. You see how, like, you couldn't tell it at first, but you see how this one's white? This one was beige. It caught me off guard. This one too. I don't know why these. Oh, wait. Because when you're looking at old photos and stuff, they have this, like, beige, old, faded look. That might be what they were going for with this. Although, I kind of would have liked to see some kind of old, worn spots along the side or something. But I can't have everything. I'll take the knowledge that this could be looking into the past. And as that happens, the night has fallen. Pages are now black. and still black. So many pages with no pictures. How odd. It's still not a picture. Go figure. Until, of course, you get to this one, which is Harry shooting out his Patronus. Very pretty picture. The burst of wand turning into a Patronus. Or Patronus, whichever. And then you saw the stag just glittering, jumping around. It looks like a deer, but it's a stag. Male deer, I think. Very amusing. And then you have this one. A very, very beautiful picture of Hermione and Harry riding Buckbeak. The dark blue made the words really hard to see. And you can't see it. It's really, really hard to see. But, hey, you, camera, don't lose focus. Thank you. You see Hermione? She said she didn't like that, but she's smiling in the photo. I guess the artist took some liberties. But, you can't really fault him. I do believe that was the last of the pictures. That is the last of the pictures. We got one chapter to go. I'm anxious to get it done. And we'll start the next book tomorrow. Yes? 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 So, final drink of water, maybe. And we'll start the final chapter. Chapter 22. Owl Post again. Harry! Hermione was tugging at his sleeve, staring at her watch. We've got exactly 10 minutes to get back down to the hospital wing without anybody seeing us, before Dumbledore locks the door. Okay, said Harry, wrenching his gaze from the sky. Let's go. They slipped through the doorway behind them and down a tightly spiraling stone staircase. As they reached the bottom of it, they heard voices. They flattened themselves against the wall and listened. It sounded like Fudge and Snape. They were walking quickly along the corridor at the foot of the staircase. Only hope Dumbledore's not going to make difficulties, Snape was saying. The kiss will be performed immediately. As soon as McNair returns with the Dementors, this whole Black affair has been highly embarrassing. I can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to informing the Daily Prophet that we've got him at last. I dare say they'll want to interview you, Snape. And once young Harry's back in his right mind, I'll expect he'll want to tell the Prophet exactly how you saved him. Harry clenched his teeth. He caught a glimpse of Snape's smirk as he and Fudge passed Harry and Hermione's hiding place. Their footsteps died away. Harry and Hermione waited a few moments to make sure they'd really gone, then started to run in the opposite direction, down one staircase, then another, along a new corridor. Then they heard a cackling ahead. Peeves, Harry muttered, grabbing Hermione's wrist. In here! They tore into a deserted classroom to their left just in time. Peeves seemed to be bouncing along the corridor in tearing spirits, laughing his head up. Oh, he's horrible, whispered Hermione, her ear to the door. I bet he's all excited because the Dementors are going to finish Sirius. She checked her watch. 3 minutes, Harry. They waited until Peeves' gloating voice had faded in the distance, then slid back out of the room and broke into a run. Hermione, what'll happen if we don't get inside before Dumbledore locks the door? Harry panicked. I don't want to think about it, Hermione moaned, checking her watch again. 1 minute! They reached the end of the corridor with the hospital wing entrance. Okay, I can hear Dumbledore, said Hermione tensely. Come on, Harry. They crept along the corridor. The door opened, and Dumbledore's back appeared. I'm going to lock you in, they heard him say. It is 5 minutes to midnight, Miss Granger. 3 turns should do it. Good luck. Dumbledore backed out of the room, closed the door, and took out his wand to magically lock it. Panicking, Harry and Hermione ran forwards. Dumbledore looked up, and a wide smile appeared under the long silver mustache. Well? He said quietly. We did it, said Harry breathlessly. Sirius has gone on Buckbeak. Dumbledore beamed at him. Well done, I think. He listened intently for any sound within the hospital wing. Yes, I think you've gone too. Get inside. I'll lock you in. Harry and Hermione slipped back inside the dormitory. It was empty except for Ron, who was still lying motionless in the end bed. As the lock clicked behind him, Harry and Hermione crept back to their own beds. Hermione tucked the time turner back under her robes. Next moment, Madame Pomfrey came striding back out of her office. Did I hear the headmaster leaving? Am I allowed to look after my patients now? She was in a very bad mood. Harry and Hermione thought it best to accept their chocolate quietly. Madame Pomfrey stood over them, making sure they ate it, but Harry could hardly swallow. He and Hermione were waiting, listening, their nerves jangling. And then, as they both took a 4th piece of chocolate from Madame Pomfrey, they heard a distant roar of fury echoing from somewhere above them. What was that? Said Madame Pomfrey in alarm. Now they could hear angry voices growing louder and louder. Madame Pomfrey was staring at the door. Really? They'll wake everybody up. What do they think they're doing? Harry was trying to hear what voices were saying. They were drawing nearer. He must have disapparated Severus. We should have left somebody in the room with him when this gets out. He didn't disapparate. Snape was roared, now very close at hand. You can't apparate or disapparate inside this castle. This has something to do with Potter. Severus, be reasonable. Harry has been locked up. Bam! The door of the hospital wing burst open. Fudge, Snape, and Dumbledore came striding into the ward. Dumbledore alone looked calm. Indeed, he looked as though he was quite enjoying himself. Fudge appeared angry, but Snape was beside with himself. Out with it, Potter, he bellowed. What did you do? Professor Snape, shrieked Madame Pomfrey. Control yourself. See here, Snape, be reasonable, said Fudge. This door's been locked. We just saw they helped him escape. I know it. Snape howled, pointing at Harry and Hermione. His face was twisted. Spit was flying from his mouth. Calm down, man, Fudge barked. You're talking nonsense. You don't know Potter, shrieked Snape. He did it. I know he did it. That will do, Severus, said Dumbledore quietly.
Think about what you are saying. This door has been locked since I left the ward 10 minutes ago. Madame Pomfrey has had these... Madame Pomfrey, have these students left their bed?
Of course not, said Madame Pomfrey, bristling. I've been with them ever since you left.
Oh, there you have it, Severus, said Dumbledore calmly. Unless you are suggesting that Harry and Hermione are able to be in two places at once, I'm afraid I don't see any point in troubling them further.
Snape stood there, seething, staring from Fudge, who looked thoroughly shocked at his behavior, to Dumbledore, whose eyes were twinkling behind his glasses. Snape whirled about, robes swishing behind him, and stormed out of the ward.
Fellow seems quite unbalanced, said Fudge, staring after him. I'd watch out for him if I were you, Dumbledore. Oh, he's not unbalanced, said Dumbledore quietly. He's just suffered a severe disappointment.
He's not the only one, puffed Fudge. The Daily Prophet's gonna have a field day. We had Black cornered, and he slipped through our fingers. Yet again. All it needs now is for the story of that hippogriff's escape to get out. I'll be a laughing stock. Oh, I'd better go and notify the Ministry.
And the Dementors?
said Dumbledore.
They'll be removed from the school, I trust.
Oh, yes, they'll have to go, said Fudge, running his fingers distractedly through his hair. Never dreamed they'd attempt to administer the kiss on an innocent boy, completely out of control. No, I'll have them packed off back to Azkaban tonight. Perhaps we should think about dragons at the school entrance.
Hagrid would like that,
said Dumbledore with a swift smile at Harry and Hermione. As he and Fudge left the dormitory, Madame Pomfrey hurried to the door and locked it again. Muttering angrily at her to herself, she headed back to her office. There was a low moan from the other end of the ward. Ron had woken up. They could see him sitting up, rubbing his head, looking around. What happened? He groaned. Harry, why are we in here? Where's Sirius? Where's Lupin? What's going on? Harry and Hermione looked at each other. You explain, said Harry, helping himself to some more chocolate. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione left the hospital wing at noon the next day, it was to find an almost deserted castle. The sweltering heat and the end of the exams meant that everyone was taking full advantage of another Hogsmeade visit. Neither Ron nor Hermione felt like going, however, so they and Harry wandered into the grounds, still talking about the extraordinary events of the previous night and wondering where Sirius and Buckbeak were now. Sitting near the lake, watching the giant squid waving its tentacles lazily above the water, Harry lost the thread of the conversation as he looked across the opposite bank. The stag had galloped towards him from there just last night. A shadow fell across them, and they looked up to see a very bleary-eyed Hagrid, mopping his sweaty face with one of his tablecloth-sized handkerchiefs and beaming down at them. No, I shouldn't be happy after what happened last night, he said. I mean, Black escaping again and everything. But guess what? What? They said, pretending to look curious. Beaky, he escaped. He's free. Been celebrating all night. It's wonderful, said Hermione, giving Ron a reproving look because he looked as though he was close to laughing. Yeah, can't have tied him up properly, said Hagrid, gazing happily out over the grounds. I was worried this morning, mine. Thought he might have met Professor Lupin in the grounds. Lupin says he never ate anything last night. What?
said Harry quickly. Blimey, haven't you heard? Said Hagrid, his smile fading a little. He lowered his voice, even though there was nobody in sight. Snape told all the Slytherins this morning. Thought everyone'd know now. Professor Lupin's a werewolf, see? He was loose on the grounds last night. He's packing now, of course. He's packing? Said Harry, alarmed. Why? Leaving, isn't he? Said Hagrid, looking surprised that Harry had to ask. Resigned first thing this morning. Says he can't risk it happening again. Harry scrambled to his feet. I'm going to see him, he said to Ron and Hermione. But if he's resigned, doesn't sound like there's anything we can do. I don't care. I still want to see him. I'll meet you back here. Lupin's office door was open. He had already packed most of his things. The Grindylows' empty tank stood next to his battered old suitcase, which was open and nearly full. Lupin was bending over something on his desk and only looked up when Harry knocked on the door. I saw you coming, said Lupin, smiling. He pointed over to the parchment. He pointed to the parchment he had been poring over. It was the Marauder's map. I just saw Hagrid, said Harry. He said you'd resign. It's not true, is it? I'm afraid it is, said Lupin. He started opening his desk drawers and taking out the contents. Why? Said Harry. The Ministry of Magic don't think you were helping Sirius, do they? Lupin crossed the door and closed it behind Harry. No. Professor Dumbledore managed to convince Fudge that I was trying to save your lives. He sighed. That was the final straw for Severus. I think the loss of the Order of Merlin hit him hard. So he, accidentally let slip that I am a werewolf this morning at breakfast. You're not leaving just because of the hat, said Harry. Lupin smiled wryly. This time tomorrow, the owls will start arriving from parents. They will not want a werewolf teaching their children, Harry. And after last night, I see their point. I could have bitten any of you. That must never happen again. You're the best defense against the arts teacher we've ever had, said Harry. Don't go. Lupin shook his head and didn't speak. He carried on emptied his drawers. Then, while Harry was trying to think of a good argument to make him stay, Lupin said, From what the headmaster told me this morning, you saved a lot of lives last night, Harry. If I'm proud of anything, it's how much you've learned. Tell me about your Patronus. How do you know about that? Said Harry, distracted. What else could have driven the Dementors back? Harry told Lupin what had happened. When he finished, Lupin was smiling again. Yes, your father was always a stag when he transformed. You guessed right. That's why he called him Prongs. Lupin threw his last few books into his case, closed the desk drawers, and turned to look at Harry. Here, I brought this from the Shrieking Shack last night, he said, handing Harry back the invisibility cloak, and he hesitated, then held out the Marauder's map. I am no longer your teacher, so I don't feel guilty about giving you this back as well. It's no use to me, and I dare say you, Ron, and Hermione will find uses for it. Harry took the map and grinned. You told me Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs would have wanted to lure me out of school. You said they would have thought it was funny. And so we would have. And so we would have done, said Lupin, now reaching down to close his case. I have no hesitation in saying that James would have been highly disappointed if his son had never found out any of the secret passages out of the castle. There was a knock on the door. Harry hastily stuffed the Marauder's map and the invisibility cloak in his pocket. It was Professor Dumbledore. He didn't look surprised to see Harry there. Your carriage is at the gates, Remus, he said. Thank you, Headmaster. Lupin picked up his old suitcase and the empty Grindylow tank. Well, goodbye, Harry, he said, smiling. It has been a real pleasure teaching you. I feel sure we'll meet again sometime. Headmaster, there's no need to see me to the gates. I can manage. Harry had the impression that Lupin wanted to leave as quickly as possible. Goodbye, then, Remus, said Dumbledore soberly. Lupin shifted the Grindylow tank slightly so that he and Dumbledore could shake hands. Then, with a final nod to Harry and a swift smile, Lupin left the office. Harry sat down in his vacated chair, staring glumly at the floor. He heard the door close and looked up. Dumbledore was still there. Why so miserable, Harry? He said, quietly. You should be very proud of yourself after last night. It didn't make any difference, said Harry bitterly. Pettigrew got away. Didn't make any difference, said Dumbledore quietly. Made all the difference in the world, Harry. You helped uncover the truth. You saved an innocent man from a terrible fate. Terrible. Something stirred in Harry's memory. I'll repeat this. Terrible. Something stirred in Harry's memory. Greater and more terrible than ever before. Professor Trelawney's prediction. Professor Dumbledore, yesterday, when I was having my divination exam, Professor Trelawney went very strange. Indeed, said Dumbledore. Stranger than usual, you mean? Yes. Her voice went all deep and her eyes rolled, and she said Voldemort's servant was going to set out to return him before midnight. She said the servant would help him come back to power. Harry stared at Dumbledore, and then she sort of became normal again, and she couldn't remember anything she'd said. Was she making a real prediction? Dumbledore looked mildly impressed. Do you know, Harry? I think she might have been, he said thoughtfully. Who would have thought it? That brings her total of real predictions up to 2. I should offer her a pay raise. But Harry looked at him aghast. How could Dumbledore take this so calmly? But I stopped Sirius and Professor Lupin killing Pettigrew. That makes it my fault if Voldemort comes back. It does not, said Dumbledore quietly. Hasn't your experience with the Time Turner taught you anything, Harry? The consequences of our actions are always so complicated, so diverse, that predicting the future is very difficult business indeed. Professor Trelawney, bless her, is living proof of that. You did a very noble thing in saving Pettigrew's life. But if he helps Voldemort bring her back to power, Pettigrew owes his life to you. You have sent Voldemort a deputy who is in your debt. When one wizard saves another wizard's life, it creates a certain bond between them. I'm much mistaken if Voldemort wants his servant to be in the debt of Harry Potter. I don't want a bond with Pettigrew, said Harry. He betrayed my parents. This is magic at its deepest. It's most impenetrable, Harry. But trust me, the time may come, when you will be very glad you saved Pettigrew's life.
Harry couldn't imagine when that would be. Dumbledore looked as though he knew what Harry was thinking.
I knew your father very well, both at Hogwarts and later, Harry, he said gently. You would have saved Pettigrew too, I'm sure of it.
Harry looked up at him. Dumbledore wouldn't laugh. He could tell Dumbledore. Last night, I thought it was my dad who conjured my Patronus. When I saw myself across the lake, I thought I was seeing him.
An easy mistake to make, said Dumbledore softly. I expect you tired of hearing it, but you do look extraordinarily like James. Except for your eyes. You have your mother's eyes.
Harry shook his head. It was stupid thinking it was him, he muttered. I knew he was dead.
You think the dead we have loved ever truly leave us? You think that we don't recall them more clearly than ever in times of great trouble? Your father is alive in you, Harry, and shows himself most plainly when you have need of him. How else could you have produced that particular Patronus? Prongs rode again last night.
It took a moment for Harry to realize what Dumbledore had said. Sirius told me all about how they became animagi last night.
Sirius told me all about how they became animagi last night, said Dumbledore, smiling. An extraordinary achievement, not least keeping it quiet from me. And then I remembered the most unusual form your Patronus took when it charged Mr. Malfoy down at your Quidditch match against Ravenclaw. So, you did see your father last night, Harry. You found him inside yourself.
And Dumbledore left the office, leaving Harry to his very confused thoughts. Nobody at Hogwarts knew the truth of what happened the night that Sirius, Buckbeak, and Pettigrew had vanished except Ron, Harry, Hermione, and Professor Dumbledore. As the end of term approached, Harry heard many different theories about what had really happened, but none of them came close to the truth. Malfoy was furious about Buckbeak. He was convinced that Hagrid had found a way of smuggling the Hippogriff to safety, and seemed outraged that he and his father had been outwitted by a gamekeeper. Percy Weasley, meanwhile, had much to say on the subject of Sirius' escape.
If I manage to get into the Ministry, I'll have a lot of proposals to make about magical law enforcement, he told the only person who would listen, his girlfriend Penelope.
Though the weather was perfect, though the atmosphere was so cheerful, though he knew they had achieved the near impossible in helping Sirius to freedom, Harry had never approached the end of a school year in worse spirits. He certainly wasn't the only one who was sorry to see Professor Lupin go. The whole of Harry's defense against the dark arts class was miserable about his resignation.
"Wonder what they'll give us next year,"
said Seamus Finnegan gloomily.
"Maybe a vampire," suggested Dean Thomas hopefully.
It wasn't only Professor Lupin's departure that was weighing on Harry's mind. He couldn't help thinking a lot about Professor Trelawney's prediction. He kept wondering where Pettigrew was now, whether he had sought sanctuary with Voldemort yet. But the thing that was lowering Harry's spirits most was the prospect of returning to the Dursleys. For maybe half an hour, a glorious half hour, he had believed he would be living with Sirius from now on, his parents' best friend. It would have been the next best thing to having his own father back. And while no news of Sirius was definitely good news, because it meant he had successfully gone into hiding,
Harry couldn't help feeling miserable when he thought of the home he might have had, and the fact that it was now impossible. The exam results came out on the last day of term. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had passed every subject. Harry was amazed that he had got through potions. He had a shrewd suspicion that Dumbledore had stepped in to stop Snape failing him on purpose. Snape's behavior towards Harry over the past week had been quite alarming. Harry wouldn't have thought it possible that Snape's dislike for him could increase, but it certainly had done. A muscle twitched unpleasantly in the corner of Snape's thin mouth every time he looked at Harry, and he was constantly flexing his fingers, as though itching to place them around Harry's throat. Percy had got his top grade newts. Fred and George scraped a handful of owls each. Gryffindor House, meanwhile, largely thanks to their spectacular performance in the Quidditch Cup, had won the house championship for the third year running. This meant that the end-of-term feast took place amid decorations of scarlet and gold, and that the Gryffindor table was the noisiest of the lot as everybody celebrated. Even Harry managed to forget about the journey back to the Dursleys next day as he ate, drank, and talked and laughed with the rest. As the Hogwarts Express pulled out of the station next morning, Hermione gave Harry and Ron some surprising news. I went to see Professor McGonagall this morning, just before breakfast. I've decided to drop Muggle studies. But you passed your exam with 320%, said Ron. I know, said Hermione, but I can't stand another year like this one. That time turner was driving me mad. I've handed it in. Without Muggle studies and divination, I'll be able to have a normal timetable again. I still can't believe you didn't tell us about it, said Ron grumpily. We're supposed to be your friends. I promised I wouldn't tell anyone, said Hermione severely. She looked around at Harry, who was watching Hogwarts disappear from view behind a mountain. 2 whole months before he'd see it again. Oh, Harry, cheer up, said Hermione sadly. I'm okay, said Harry quickly. Just thinking about the holidays. Yeah, I've been thinking about them too, said Ron. Harry, you've got to come and stay with us. I'll fix it up with Mom and Dad, and then I'll call you. I know how to use a fellytone now. A telephone, Ron, said Hermione. Honestly, you should take Muggle studies next year. Ron ignored her. It's the Quidditch World Cup this summer. How about it, Harry? Come and stay, and we'll go and see it. Dad can usually get tickets from work. The proposal had the effect of cheering Harry up a great deal. Yeah, I bet the Dursleys would be pleased to let me come, especially after what I did to Aunt Marge. Feeling considerably more cheerful, Harry joined Ron and Hermione in several games of Exploding Snap. And when the witch with the tea trolley arrived, he bought himself a very large lunch, though nothing with chocolate in it. But it was late in the afternoon before the thing that made him truly happy turned up. Harry, said Hermione suddenly, peering over his shoulder, what's that thing outside your window? Harry turned to look outside. Something very small and gray was bobbing in and out of sight beyond the glass. He stood up for a better look and saw it was a tiny owl, carrying a letter which was much too big for it. The owl was so small, in fact, that it kept tumbling over in the air, buffeted this way and that in the train's slipstream. Harry quickly pulled down the window, stretched out his arm, and caught it. It felt like a very fluffy snitch. He brought it carefully inside. The owl dropped its letter onto Harry's seat and began zooming around the compartment, apparently very pleased with itself for accomplishing its task. Hedwig clicked her beak with a sort of dignified disapproval. Crookshanks sat up in his seat, following the owl with his great yellow eyes. Ron, noticing this, snatched the owl safely out of harm's way. Harry picked up the letter. It was addressed to him. He ripped open the letter and shouted, "It's from Sirius!" "What?" said Ron and Hermione excitedly. "Read it out loud." "Dear Harry, I hope this finds you before you reach your aunt and uncle. I don't know whether they're used to owl post. Buckbeak and I are in hiding. I won't tell you where, in case this falls into the wrong hands. I have some doubt about this owl's reliability, but he is the best I could find. He did seem eager for the job. I believe the Dementors are still searching for me, but they haven't a hope of finding me here. I am planning to allow some muggles to glimpse me soon, a long way from Hogwarts, so that the security in the castle will be lifted. There's something I never got around to telling you during our brief meeting. It was I who sent you the firebolt." "Ha!" said Hermione triumphantly. "See? I told you it was from him." "Yeah, but he hadn't jinxed it, had he?" said Ron. "Ouch!" The tiny owl, now hooting happily in his hand, had nibbled one of his fingers in what it seemed to think was an affectionate way. "Crookshanks took the order to the owl office for me. I used your name, but told them to take the gold from the Gringotts vault number 711, my own. Please consider it as a 13 birthdays worth of presents from your godfather. I would also like to apologize for the fright I think I gave you that night last year when you left your uncle's house. I'd only hoped to get a glimpse of you before starting my journey north, but I think the sight of me alarmed you. I'm enclosing something else for you which I think will make next year at Hogwarts more enjoyable. If you ever need me, send word. Your owl will find me. I'll write again soon. Sirius." Harry looked eagerly inside the envelope. There was another piece of parchment in there. He read it quickly and felt suddenly as warm and contented as though he'd swallow a whole bottle of hot butterbeer in one go. "I, Sirius Black, Harry Potter's godfather, hereby give him permission to visit Hogsmeade at weekends." "That'll be good enough for Dumbledore," said Harry happily. He looked back at Sirius's letter. "Hang on, there's a P.S. I thought your friend Ron might like to keep this owl, as it's my fault he no longer has a rat." Ron's eyes widened. The minute owl was still hooting excitedly. "Keep him?" he said uncertainly. He looked closely at the owl for a moment. Then, to Harry and Hermione's great surprise, he held him out to Crookshanks' sniff. "What do you reckon?" Ron asked the cat. "Definitely an owl?" Crookshanks purred. "It's good enough for me," said Ron. "He's mine." Harry read and reread the letter from Sirius all the way back to King's Cross Station. It was still clutched tightly in his hands as he, Ron, and Hermione stepped back through the barrier of platform 9 3/4. Harry spotted Uncle Vernon at once. He was standing a good distance from Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, eyeing them suspiciously, and when Miss Weasley hugged Harry in greeting, his worst suspicions about them seemed confirmed. "I'll call about the World Cup," Ron yelled after Harry, as Harry bid him and Hermione goodbye, then wheeled the trolley bearing his trunk and Hedwig's skate towards Uncle Vernon, who greeted him in usual fashion. "What's that?" he snarled, staring at the envelope. Harry was still clenching in his hand. "It's another form for me to sign. You got another—" "It's not," said Harry cheerfully. "It's a letter from my godfather." "Godfather?" spluttered Uncle Vernon. "You haven't got a godfather." "Yes, I have," said Harry brightly. "He was my mom and dad's best friend. He's a convicted murderer, but he's broken out of wizard prison and he's on the run. He likes to keep in touch with me, though. Keep up with my news. Check if I'm happy. And grinning broadly at the look of horror on Uncle Vernon's face, Harry set off towards the station exit, Hedwig rattling along in front of him for what looked like a much better summer than the last. And that ends the final chapter of the book. There are some pictures in here, two in particular that I wanted to show you. And one of them is so cute. Forgive me if I rush through these. There's Owl Post. Nothing. Although this one does have backgrounds. Looks kind of like clouds. Which makes sense considering there's birds on it. Oh, this one makes me sad. It's Professor Lupin, looking glum, black and white. I really like that photo. It's so sad though, but I love it. But I think my favorite, well, not quite. There's a picture of the castle and the three of them sitting on the wall. Actually, no, that's not the three of them. That's just the castle. And those three weren't those three. Because Harry doesn't have an afro. And Ron doesn't have yellow hair. This one's cute. Look at the owl. It's so cute. Oh, look at the little wee thing. Oh, it's so adorable. That was the last of the pictures. That, my wonderful audience, is the final book of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. I have Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire in hardcover. I'll start reading that tomorrow. Unfortunately, it is not illustrated, so I'll have no pictures for you. Sorry, it's the best I could do. Unless I ordered it like a month ago, there's no way for me to get it. So, let's find a raid target, and I could desperately use the bathroom. Yes. So, let's see who we can raid. Gozen, Bonnie, Wetchery, Natick. He's doing viewer levels. Rain-X, Snowshoes, Crazy Geek, M-Dog, Chef Studio, Donkey Bond, but he's not live yet. We'll raid Cam Dog. Hello, Pixel. I know Monster Man literally just ended because I see his stream just ended. We're going to be raiding Cam Dog. And Okay. I need forgive me for rushing. I really have to go. Like really have to go. He's playing Mario Party Jamboree with viewers. 1, 2, 3. Thank you all for listening. Forgive my rush to leave. I'm in pain. I gotta go. See yous.